The carved turkey sat perfectly golden at the center of our dining table, surrounded by all the traditional Thanksgiving fixings I'd spent 2 days preparing. Steam rose from the garlic mashed potatoes, while cranberry sauce glistened under the chandelier's warm light. I watched my mother Susan delicately unfold a cream-colored envelope, her manicured nails catching the light as she extracted 2 documents with theatrical precision. "And this, Ryan, is for being such an exceptional son," she announced, sliding the papers across the mahogany surface toward my younger brother. The Japan Airlines logo gleamed on premium ticket jackets. First class, Tokyo. 14 nights at the Park Hyatt. Every detail screamed luxury. My exhausted fingers tightened around my fork. Those tickets bore a confirmation number I knew by heart. I'd booked them 3 weeks ago using my year-end bonus and 500,000 accumulated miles from endless business trips. My body ached from another 80-hour work week, but I'd push through knowing this trip would finally show my family I'd made it. Susan's voice cut through my thoughts like ice. "You're only here because I felt sorry for you." The words hung in the air while she looked directly at me, her meaning crystal clear to everyone at the table. 25 years of being reminded I was the adopted child, the charity case. I set down my fork gently, rose from my chair, cleared my plate into the kitchen sink with measured movements. Not a single word left my lips as I collected my purse and walked out the front door, leaving behind the silence and the smell of pumpkin pie. My hands trembled against the steering wheel as I navigated through empty Chicago streets. Each red light gave me another moment to process what had just happened, but my mind kept circling back through decades of similar moments. The comment about feeling sorry for me wasn't new. Susan had weaponized my adoption since the day I'd accidentally discovered those papers hidden in her filing cabinet. I was 15 looking for my birth certificate for driver's education class. Instead, I found a folder labeled Linda Placement Documents. Inside were adoption papers, death certificates for 2 people named Margaret and Thomas Chen, and financial documents I didn't understand at the time. When I confronted Susan, she didn't deny it. She simply said I should be grateful they'd taken me in when nobody else wanted a traumatized 5-year-old. That became her favorite weapon. Every time I brought home straight A's, she'd remind me that I was trying too hard to prove I belonged. When I got into Northwestern on a full scholarship, she told relatives it was probably affirmative action for orphans. When I landed my job at Morrison Tech straight out of college, she suggested they needed to fill diversity quotas. But last month changed everything. Susan had called me over claiming her computer had a virus. She needed me to fix it immediately because she had important consulting work to submit. I knew she didn't have any real clients, but I went anyway. I always went. While running antivirus software, I noticed dozens of financial documents in her recent files. Curiosity made me click one. My biological parents' names jumped off the screen. Margaret and Thomas Chen had been brilliant software engineers who'd built 3 successful startups before a drunk driver took their lives. They'd left behind a trust fund for their only daughter, me. The documents showed an initial value of $4 million. I kept clicking through files, my stomach churning with each revelation. Transfer authorizations with my forged signature. Withdrawal receipts spanning 20 years, account statements showing systematic drainage of funds. By my quick calculation, Susan had stolen approximately $2.8 million of my inheritance. The most damning evidence was an email chain between Susan and someone named Gerald Hoffman Esquire. They discussed strategies for accessing the remaining funds and mentioned something about overseas accounts my parents had established. Susan wrote about keeping me compliant and unaware until they could complete the final transfers. I'd photographed everything with my phone, uploaded it to 3 different cloud services, and spent the next month quietly planning. I consulted with Sarah Winters, a friend from college who'd become a criminal defense attorney. She confirmed what I suspected. This was a federal wire fraud identity theft and likely racketeering if others were involved. Linda, this is massive, Sarah had said over coffee at her office. This isn't just family drama, this is organized crime. I started documenting everything. Every family event where money was discussed. Every time Susan mentioned her mysterious consulting income. Every luxury purchase that didn't match their declared earnings. I also began taking control of family finances under the guise of being helpful. Susan was happy to let me manage tedious tasks like bills and travel arrangements. She had no idea I was mapping out every account, every password, every financial connection. Tonight's performance with the tickets was the final test. I deliberately booked those Japan flights using family miles accumulated on cards I managed paid for with my bonus, but processed through accounts Susan thought she controlled. When she gave them to Ryan as his gift, she proved she'd been monitoring my purchases and stealing from me in real time. I pulled into my apartment building's garage and sat in the darkness for a moment. My phone buzzed with texts from Ryan, probably gloating about his upcoming trip. I didn't read them. Instead, I thought about Margaret and Thomas Chen, the brilliant parents I'd never really known. They'd worked so hard to ensure their daughter would be provided for. They couldn't have imagined their legacy would be stolen by the very people who promised to care for her. But they'd raised a fighter, even if only for 5 short years. Somewhere in my DNA was their intelligence, their determination, their refusal to accept defeat. Susan had made a critical error tonight. She'd pushed too far, taken. Too much assumed I'd always be that scared little girl who desperately wanted to belong. She was wrong. I wasn't here because anyone felt sorry for me. I was here because I'd survived everything she'd thrown at me and built my own success despite her sabotage. The woman who'd walked out of that house tonight wasn't the compliant, adopted daughter Susan thought she controlled. I was Margaret and Thomas Chen's daughter, and I was about to take back everything that belonged to me. My apartment offered the sanctuary I desperately needed. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Lake Michigan, a view I'd earned through years of grinding corporate ladder climbing, while Susan told everyone I'd probably gotten promoted for being a diversity hire. I powered up my laptop and opened the encrypted folder containing weeks of meticulous planning. Tonight's events had accelerated my timeline, but I was ready. First task, the Japan Airlines reservations. I logged into the account and smiled grimly at the confirmation page. 2 first-class tickets to Tokyo departing in 36 hours. With a few clicks, I initiated the cancellation process. Full refund to the original payment method, my credit card. Next came the 500,000 miles I transferred to make the booking possible. Those miles represented 5 years of red-eye flights, countless delays in airport lounges, and meetings in 27 different countries. I reversed the transfer, watching the points flow back into my personal account. The Park Hyatt Tokyo reservation came next. 14 nights in a suite with Mount Fuji views. I'd selected that specific room because a client had once told me watching the sunrise from there had changed his perspective on life. I'd wanted to share that experience with my family to show them beauty existed beyond Susan's materialistic scorekeeping. Now I canceled it without hesitation, securing another full refund. My fingers moved to more serious business. The family emergency account held $50,000 funded entirely by my quarterly contributions over the past 3 years. Susan had convinced me to add her and Ryan as authorized users for safety purposes. I initiated an immediate freeze and removal of their access. The checking account we used for household expenses got the same treatment. Every credit card where I was the primary account holder, but they were authorized users. Frozen access, revoked cards canceled. My phone started vibrating incessantly. Ryan calling, then Susan, then numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail while I worked through my list. Password changes came next. Email accounts Susan didn't know I knew about. the family Netflix she'd be locked out of mid-episode, the Amazon Prime account laden with her shopping history, even the Starbucks app where she loved flaunting her gold status, funded by my daily coffee purchases. As I worked, an email notification caught my attention. Ryan had sent something with the subject line, "Big plans for Tokyo." I opened it, knowing I'd need all available intelligence for what came next. The email made my blood run cold. Ryan had forwarded me a chain between him and Susan by mistake clearly meant for someone else. The messages detailed their plan to use the Tokyo trip for more than tourism. They'd scheduled meetings with a banker who could supposedly help them access my overseas investment accounts I didn't even know existed yet. Ryan had written, "Mom says Linda's bio parents set up education funds in multiple countries. The lawyer found traces in Japan, Singapore, and Switzerland. If we can get power of attorney while we're there, we can finally close this out. She'll never even know. She's too busy trying to impress us to check her own holdings." Attached were draft power of attorney documents with my forged signature dated for next week. The forgery was sophisticated. They'd clearly been practicing. Another attachment showed correspondence with someone named Kenji Nakamura at Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group discussing requirements for accessing dormant accounts with proper documentation. I immediately called Sarah despite the late hour. She answered on the second ring alert as always. I forwarded her the emails while explaining the new developments. "Linda, this is attempted international wire fraud," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "They're planning to commit crimes in multiple jurisdictions. We need to contact the FBI tonight." The FBI. I sank into my couch, the weight of the situation settling over me. This is beyond state lines, beyond national borders. It involves identity theft, forged legal documents, and conspiracy to commit fraud internationally. These aren't just family squabbles anymore. Your adoptive mother is running a sophisticated criminal operation. Sarah gave me the contact information for Special Agent Elena Martinez, who specialized in international financial crimes with a focus on family-based fraud schemes. I made the call immediately, my hands steady despite my racing heart. Agent Martinez listened to my summary without interruption, then asked pointed questions about documentation timelines and other potential victims. Her final question stopped me cold. "Ms. Chen, in your research, have you found evidence of your adoptive mother doing this to other children?" I thought about the mysterious references in Susan's emails, the careful language about previous successes and established methods. I'm not sure, but some communications suggest this might not be her first time. "Can you come to our field office tomorrow morning? Bring everything you have, and Ms. Chen, don't let them know you're aware of their plans. Act normal if they contact you. We may need you to gather more evidence." After ending the call, I sat in darkness, city lights twinkling below. My phone showed 47 missed calls and 92 text messages. I scrolled through a sampling. Ryan's texts evolved from gloating to confusion to anger. Susan's went from condescending reminders about family gratitude to barely coherent rage about frozen accounts. The last text from Susan read, "You ungrateful brat. After everything we've done for you, you're nothing without us. Answer your phone." I deleted them all without responding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I'd taken the first crucial steps. They thought they were stealing from a compliant orphan who'd do anything to belong. They were about to discover they'd been stealing from someone far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. Dawn broke gray over Chicago, matching my mood as I prepared for the FBI meeting. My phone had logged another 113 calls through the night. The voicemail started desperately polite, but devolved into threats by morning. I selected a conservative black suit and pulled my hair into a neat bun. Looking professional felt like armor against the chaos I'd unleashed. The federal building stood like a fortress in the Loop, all concrete and bulletproof glass. I passed through security checkpoints, my documented evidence weighing heavy in my leather portfolio. Agent Elena Martinez met me in the lobby. A woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying temples that suggested years of witnessing humanity's worst betrayals. Her office was sparse but organized with a whiteboard covered in interconnected names and dates. My stomach clenched when I recognized Susan's name at the center of a complex web. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming. Agent Martinez gestured to a chair. I need to share something before we review your evidence. Your adoptive mother has been on our radar for 6 months. The room seemed to tilt. What do you mean? We've been investigating a sophisticated adoption fraud ring targeting children with inheritances. Susan Mitchell isn't just stealing from you. We've identified at least 3 other victims across different states. She pulled out a file and showed me photographs. 3 young adults, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, but their stories were chillingly similar. Adopted after their wealthy parents died, trust funds mysteriously drained, emotional manipulation keeping them quiet. Marcus Williams in Texas lost his parents in a plane crash. $4 million inheritance gone. Jennifer Huang in California orphaned by a gas leak explosion. $3.5 million vanished. David Thompson in Florida, parents killed in a boating accident. $2.7 million stolen. Each name felt like a punch to my gut. I wasn't alone. Susan had perfected her method, choosing children young enough to manipulate but old enough to remember trauma. We were all around the same age now, late 20s to early 30s, finally discovering the truth. Why hasn't she been arrested? I asked. Insufficient evidence. These schemes are designed to look like legitimate family spending. The victims often don't realize they've been robbed until decades later, and by then, the money trails are cold. Your documentation might be the breakthrough we need. I spread my evidence across her desk. Bank statements forged, signatures, email chains recorded conversations. Agent Martinez's expression grew more intense with each document. She called in 2 other agents, a forensic accountant and a digital crimes specialist. They pored over everything, occasionally asking clarification questions. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant at Morrison Tech. Your mom is in the lobby demanding to see you. Security is holding her. What should we do? Agent Martinez noticed my expression. What's happening? Susan's at my office. Perfect. We've prepared for this. She handed me a small device. This is a recording device. It looks like a pen but captures high-definition audio. We need you to meet with them, act confused about the account freezes, and let them incriminate themselves. Can you do that? Fear and determination warred in my chest. Yes. We'll have agents nearby. If you feel threatened, use the safe word pineapple, and we'll intervene immediately. An hour later, I walked into Morrison Tech's marble lobby to find chaos. Susan stood at security, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. Her designer blazer was wrinkled, her lipstick smeared from ranting. Ryan sat slumped in a chair, typing furiously on his phone. What, Linda? Susan's voice echoed off the walls. What have you done? Our cards are declined everywhere. The bank says we're not authorized users anymore. Fix this immediately. I arranged my face into confused concern. Mom, what are you talking about? What's wrong with the cards? Don't play dumb with me, she hissed, grabbing my arm. Security stepped forward, but I waved them off. You did something last night. The Japan tickets are canceled. The hotel won't honor our reservation. Even my Starbucks app isn't working. I don't understand. Why would I cancel Ryan's graduation gift? I kept my voice steady, channeling years of corporate presentations. Maybe it's a bank error. The holidays always cause system glitches. Ryan stood up, his face red with rage. Stop lying. I know you did this. You're jealous because Mom loves me more. You've always been jealous, trying to buy your way into the family. Ryan, that's ridiculous. I love you both. Maybe someone stole our information. We should file a police report. The pen in my pocket captured Susan's sharp intake of breath. Her eyes narrowed as she calculated her next move. A police report. That's not necessary. Just call the bank and fix it. We have important business in Tokyo. What business? I tilted my head innocently. I thought it was a vacation. Susan and Ryan exchanged a loaded glance. Just some investment opportunities, Susan said quickly. Nothing you need to worry about. Now fix the accounts. I'll need to see documentation about these investments. As the primary account holder, I should understand any financial commitments before restoring access. Susan's mask finally slipped completely. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. You listen to me, you ungrateful little orphan. I pulled you out of foster care. I gave you a life. You owe me everything. That money your parents left, it's payment for raising you. Every cent belongs to me. My parents' money. I let shock color my voice. What are you talking about? Don't pretend you don't know. Susan was losing control, her voice rising. I've been managing your trust fund for 23 years. That money paid for your food, your clothes, your education. And there's more coming. Accounts your parents hid overseas. We're going to collect what's ours, whether you like it or not. Ryan grabbed her arm. Mom, shut up! Not here! But Susan was beyond reason. She needs to know her place. We have lawyers, Linda. We have documents. Power of attorney. You can't stop us. That money is ours by right. By what right? I asked quietly. By the right of keeping you when nobody else wanted damaged goods. The words echoed through the marble lobby. Several employees had stopped to stare. You came to us broken, crying every night for dead parents. We suffered through your trauma, your therapy, your neediness. 2.8 million doesn't even cover the emotional labor. The exact amount. She'd just confessed to knowing precisely how much she'd stolen. Security moved closer as Susan's volume increased. My boss, Jennifer Walsh, emerged from the executive elevator, taking in the scene with sharp eyes. I met her gaze and gave a tiny shake of my head. Not yet. Mom, I said carefully, I think you're confused. Maybe we should discuss this somewhere private. Confused? I'm not confused about anything. Tomorrow morning, Ryan and I are getting on a plane to Tokyo. We have meetings with bankers who will help us access what's rightfully ours. And if you try to stop us, I'll tell everyone what you really are. A charity case who bit the hand that fed her. These bankers? I pressed gently. Do they know you're not actually authorized on any accounts? Susan smiled, cruel and confident. They will be shown documentation that says otherwise. Legal documentation with your signature. You've been very cooperative over the years, signing whatever I put in front of you. You mean forged documentation? I mean necessary documentation, Susan snapped, the kind that ensures ungrateful adopted children don't steal from the families who saved them. The FBI had more than enough. I glanced at Jennifer, who nodded slightly. Time to end this performance. I see, I said simply. Well, I should tell you that your flight tomorrow might have some complications. What complications? Ryan demanded. We'll buy new tickets if we have to. No, you won't. I smiled sadly at the woman who'd raised me and stolen my birthright, because by tomorrow morning, the FBI will have frozen all your accounts and flagged your passports. You just confessed to 23 years of fraud in front of 30 witnesses. Susan's face drained of color. You're lying. I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording app, though the real device was the pen. Every word, Susan, every confession, every threat. The FBI has been investigating you for months. I just gave them what they needed to file charges. You set me up. Susan lunged at me, but security intercepted her. You ungrateful bitch, I'm your mother. No, I said quietly as security restrained her. You're just the woman who stole my mother's legacy. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Ryan tried to run, but building security blocked the exits. He turned to me with desperate eyes. Linda, please, I'm your brother. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other, I replied. Family doesn't forge documents or plan international fraud. Family doesn't use love as a weapon. The police arrived in force, followed by Agent Martinez and her team. They arrested Susan and Ryan on multiple federal charges while reading their rights. The lobby full of my colleagues watched in stunned silence as my adoptive family was led away in handcuffs. Jennifer Walsh approached me as the chaos settled. "Linda, are you all right?" I said, exhaustion hitting me in waves. "I'm sorry for bringing this drama to the office." "Don't apologize. You showed incredible courage. Take the rest of the week off. Deal with whatever you need to. Your job will be waiting." As I gathered my things, Agent Martinez pulled me aside. "You did perfectly. We have everything we need for initial charges. But I need to warn you. Our investigation suggests this goes much deeper. Your mother isn't working alone. Are you prepared to see this through to the end?" I thought about the 3 other victims, about trust funds meant to secure futures instead, funding criminal lifestyles, about children manipulated into grateful silence while their birthrights vanished. "Yes," I said firmly, "I want to see it all exposed. Every victim deserves justice." "Good, because what we uncovered today, it's just the beginning." 3 days pass in a blur of FBI interviews and evidence documentation. I'd taken refuge in my apartment, ordering groceries online and screening calls from shocked relatives who'd heard about Susan's arrest. The family phone tree had exploded with gossip, but I wasn't ready for those conversations yet. On the 4th evening, a text from an unexpected source changed everything. Robert Mitchell, the man I'd called Dad for 23 years. "Linda, please come to the house. I need to talk to you alone. Susan and Ryan are still in custody. This is important." Robert had always been a shadow in our family dynamic. Quiet where Susan commanded attention, passive where she dominated. I'd wondered countless times why he stayed, why he never defended me during Susan's cruelest moments. Now, sitting in my car outside the Naperville house where I'd grown up, I wondered if I'd finally get answers. The house looked different without Susan's presence. Newspapers accumulated on the driveway. Mail overflowed from the box. The prized rose bushes she'd insisted I maintain every summer showed signs of neglect. Robert answered the door looking like he'd aged 10 years in 4 days. His usually neat silver hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled. "Linda," his voice cracked, "thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." The living room felt like a museum of my stolen childhood. Family portraits lined the walls, Susan's satisfied smile, Ryan's privileged smirk, Robert's distant gaze, and me always slightly apart trying so hard to belong. I sat on the edge of the sofa where I'd once curled up for story time back when I still believed in fairy tale families. Robert poured himself scotch with shaking hands. He offered me a glass, but I declined, needing clarity for whatever came next. "I know you must hate me," he began, staring into his drink. 23 years of watching her hurt you, and I said nothing, did nothing. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but you need to know the truth." "What truth?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I didn't know about the money," he said urgently. "I swear on my mother's grave, Linda, I had no idea she was stealing from you. I thought her consulting business was real. She had an office business cards, a website. She'd leave for client meetings and come back with contracts. I never questioned where the money actually came from. But you knew she was cruel to me. You heard the things she said." Robert's shoulders slumped. "Yes, I heard everything. Every reminder that you weren't really ours, every comment about charity cases, every time she used your adoption as a weapon. And I stayed silent like a coward." "Why?" The question I'd wanted to ask for decades finally escaped. He set down his glass and looked at me with haunted eyes. "Because 30 years ago, I was weak and stupid, and she saved me from myself. I'd gambled away everything. Our first house, my business, nearly destroyed my family's company. I was about to lose custody of my son from my first marriage. Susan appeared like an angel, paying off my debts, hiring lawyers, rebuilding my life. I thought I owed her everything." "So you let her torture an innocent child as payment?" "No." He stood abruptly pacing to the window. It wasn't supposed to be like that. When she suggested adoption, I thought it was beautiful, giving a child a second chance, building a bigger family. When we got you, Linda, I fell in love instantly. This tiny, brave little girl who'd lost everything but still smiled. You had your mother's eyes. Did you know that I saw the photos in your file? Margaret Chen's eyes, full of intelligence and kindness. Tears burned my throat, but I wouldn't let them fall. Not yet. I tried to protect you in small ways, Robert continued. Remember when Susan wanted to send you to that military-style boarding school, I threatened divorce. When she tried to block your Northwestern scholarship, I called the admissions office behind her back. Every raise I got, I'd slip money into your college fund without telling her. That's not enough, I said flatly. You let her steal millions while slipping me 20s. I know. God, I know. But I was terrified. She had evidence of my gambling addiction records that could have destroyed my career and taken away my visitation rights with Michael. She controlled everything. Finances, social connections, even my medication for anxiety. I became dependent on her management of my life. You chose your comfort over my safety. Yes, he whispered, and I'll regret it until I die. But Linda, these last few days have opened my eyes to so much more. After her arrest, I started going through her office. I found things that prove this is bigger than just your trust fund. He disappeared upstairs and returned with a banker's box full of documents. She kept records of everything. Names, amounts, dates. You weren't the first, Linda. There was a boy before you, Samuel Morrison. She had him for 3 years before he went to live with relatives in Canada, except I found his death certificate. Suicide at 18, 2 months after she emptied his trust fund. My heart clenched. Another child destroyed by Susan's greed. There are more files. Practice adoptions, she called them in her notes. Testing the system, learning how to forge documents, building connections with corrupt lawyers and social workers. You survived because by the time she got you, she'd perfected her method. No need to drive children to desperate measures. Just steal quietly while breaking them down psychologically. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because I want to help put her away forever, Robert said fiercely. I've already met with the FBI, given them everything I found. I'm filing for divorce and testifying against her. My lawyer says I'll probably face charges too. Negligence at minimum, possibly conspiracy if they think I knew more. I'll accept whatever punishment comes. And what about Ryan, your biological son, Das? Robert's face crumbled. Ryan knew. He's known for years and chose to participate. I found emails from when he was 16 offering to help Susan access your accounts in exchange for a Ferrari. My son became a criminal under my own roof while I buried my head in denial. The weight of his failures settled between us like a physical presence. Part of me wanted to comfort the broken man who'd been the closest thing to a father I'd known. But a larger part remembered every time he'd looked away, chosen silence, failed to protect me. I'm going to ask you something, I said carefully, and I need complete honesty. Did my biological parents really die in a car accident? Robert went very still. What makes you ask that? Susan's too good at making children orphans with wealthy parents. Samuel's parents died in a fire. The other victims Agent Martinez mentioned all lost parents in accidents. It's a pattern. I don't know, Robert admitted, but I found something that disturbed me. A letter in Susan's safe from someone named Dr. Harrison Vance dated 2 months before your parents died. It discusses potential candidates and timeline for placement. Linda, I think your parents might have been murdered. The room spun. I gripped the sofa arm to stay upright. You're saying Susan had my parents killed? I'm saying there's enough evidence to warrant investigation. I've given everything to the FBI. If she orchestrated murders for money, she'll never see freedom again. We sat in heavy silence while I processed this nuclear revelation. My entire life had been built on lies, but this suggested an evil beyond comprehension. Susan hadn't just stolen from orphans. She might have created them. There's one more thing, Robert said quietly. Your Aunt Patricia, your father's sister. Susan told you she died years ago, but I found Christmas cards she'd been hiding. Patricia is alive living in Seattle. She's been trying to find you for 20 years. He handed me a worn envelope addressed to my beloved niece Linda. Inside was a phone number and a simple message: "If you ever get this, please call. I never stopped looking for you." "I'm going to leave now," Robert said, standing slowly. "The house is in my name. I'll sign it over to you as part of the settlement. It's not enough, will never be enough, but it's a start. If you never want to see me again, I understand. But if you need testimony evidence or just someone to admit the truth in court, I'll be there." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Linda, you became extraordinary despite us, not because of us. Your parents would be so proud of who you are. And somewhere in a better universe, I hope there's a version of me who was brave enough to be the father you deserved." After he left, I sat alone in the house that had never really been home. The walls held 23 years of pain, manipulation, and theft, but they also held proof of Susan's crimes evidence that would help bring justice not just for me, but for all her victims. I picked up my phone and dialed the Seattle number with trembling fingers. It rang twice before a woman answered her voice, carrying traces of my father's accent. "Hello? Aunt Patricia, this is Linda. Linda Chen. I just got your letter." A sob broke through the line. "Oh my God! Linda, my brother's baby, is it really you?" "It's me," I whispered, tears finally flowing freely. "And I need to tell you everything." The news of Susan and Ryan's release on bail reached me through Agent Martinez's terse phone call. A judge had deemed them non-violent offenders with community ties and set bail at $500,000 each. Somehow, Susan had liquidated hidden assets to secure their freedom, with strict conditions, surrendered passports, ankle monitors, and no contact with me. "We're tracking their every move," Agent Martinez assured me. "If they violate any terms, they're back in custody immediately." But I knew Susan better than any FBI profile could capture. She'd spent decades perfecting deception. House arrest wouldn't stop someone who'd potentially orchestrated murders for money. My instincts proved right when my bank notified me of unusual activity on an old investment account I'd forgotten existed. Someone had attempted to wire transfer funds to an account in Tokyo. The transaction failed due to new security protocols I'd installed, but the attempt originated from Susan's laptop IP address. She was still trying to access money bail conditions be damned. I called Sarah, my lawyer friend, who'd become integral to building the case. "They're not giving up. Susan just tried to crack an investment account." "Document everything," Sarah instructed. "Each violation strengthens our case." Meanwhile, I have news. Remember those overseas accounts Ryan mentioned? We've located 3 in Japan, 2 in Singapore, and 1 in Switzerland. Your parents were brilliant. They diversified holdings across multiple currencies and institutions. Current value exceeds $12 million. $12 million! My parents had secured my future 3 times over, yet I'd grown up feeling like a burden, wearing Ryan's hand-me-downs while Susan complained about the cost of raising an extra child. 2 days later, my phone rang from an international number. Assuming it was related to the overseas accounts, I answered. "Miss Linda Chen." The accent was distinctly Japanese. "This is Kenji Nakamura from Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group. I'm calling regarding your mother, Susan Mitchell, and brother Ryan Mitchell. They've just checked into the Park Hyatt, Tokyo." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. They're on house arrest. Their passports were confiscated." "I assure you they arrived this morning. They presented documents claiming power of attorney over your accounts and scheduled meetings with our wealth management division. When we ran standard verification, your name appeared on a new FBI alert system. I'm contacting you before involving local authorities." I conferenced in Agent Martinez while Mr. Nakamura waited. Her explosion of expletives confirmed this wasn't part of any authorized operation. "How did they get to Japan?" I demanded. Fake passports, Martinez said grimly. High-quality forgeries using aliases. We're checking private jet manifests now. Mr. Nakamura, please stall their meetings. We're coordinating with Japanese law enforcement immediately. There's more, Mr. Nakamura added. They're not alone. A man named Gerald Hoffman accompanied them, presenting himself as their legal counsel. Gerald Hoffman, the lawyer from Susan's emails who'd helped orchestrate the theft. The network was mobilizing, desperate to access my parents' final legacy before the FBI froze international assets. Mr. Nakamura, I said, thinking quickly, the Park Hyatt reservation they're using. I made that booking originally. Can you help me execute a plan? An hour of frantic coordination followed. I contacted the Park Hyatt management, explaining the situation with verification from both FBI and Japanese banking officials. The hotel's head of security, James Morrison, was American ex-military who took financial fraud personally after his own father lost retirement savings to a scam. "What do you need, Miss Chen?" Morrison asked after reviewing the evidence. "I need you to make their stay memorable, but first, let them think they're winning." The plan unfolded with surgical precision. Susan, Ryan, and Hoffman enjoyed their first evening in Tokyo, dining at the hotel's Michelin-starred restaurant, charging $1,000 sake bottles to their suite. They had no idea their every move was being recorded, their conversations monitored by Japanese intelligence services. The next morning, they arrived at Mitsubishi UFJ for their appointment. Mr. Nakamura greeted them warmly, playing the role of accommodating banker perfectly. He reviewed their forged documents with apparent approval, even complimenting the quality of the legal work. Susan preened while Ryan took photos, already spending money they'd never touch. "The accounts your daughter inherited are substantial," Mr. Nakamura explained, showing them fabricated statements I'd authorized. "However, accessing them requires specific protocols. We'll need to verify the power of attorney through our legal department. This typically takes 24 hours. Susan's impatience flared, but Hoffman counseled acceptance. They scheduled a follow-up appointment and returned to the hotel, confident in their imminent success. That evening, their suite phone rang. Morrison's team had waited until they'd ordered room service, opened another expensive bottle, and settled in for celebration. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is hotel management. We've been contacted by your financial institution regarding your reservation. There seems to be an issue with payment authorization." Susan's indignant response carried through the suite's thin walls to the recording equipment. "That's absurd. Check again. The reservation is fully paid." "I'm afraid not, ma'am. The original booking party has contested the charges and reported unauthorized use of their credit information. We'll need immediate alternative payment, or you'll have to vacate the premises." What followed was 45 minutes of escalating panic as Susan discovered every credit card declined, every account frozen, every avenue of payment blocked. The FBI had coordinated with international banking systems to completely cut off her financial access. But the best part came when Japanese police arrived ostensibly for a routine passport check of foreign guests. Susan and Ryan presented their forgeries with practiced confidence, unaware that Interpol had already flagged the false identities. "These documents appear questionable," the lead officer announced after theatrical examination. "You'll need to accompany us for verification." Hoffman tried to intervene with legal bluster, but Japanese authorities aren't easily intimidated. They separated the trio for individual questioning while searching their luggage. What they found exceeded everyone's expectations. Susan had traveled with a treasure trove of evidence. Original trust fund documents with my parents' signatures, forged power of attorney papers for multiple victims, a laptop containing 20 years of financial crimes mapped out in spreadsheet detail, even handwritten notes planning the theft of my inheritance, complete with timelines and contingency plans. In her arrogance, she'd brought everything needed to access the overseas accounts, never imagining the trip itself was a trap. Every document became evidence, every forged signature another federal charge, every encrypted file proof of conspiracy spanning decades. Ryan broke first under questioning. Faced with potential decades in Japanese prison, he sang like the coward he'd always been. He revealed Susan's network corrupt social workers who identified wealthy orphans, lawyers who facilitated fraudulent adoptions, financial advisors who helped hide stolen millions, names, dates, amounts. He gave them everything to save himself. Hoffman maintained attorney-client privilege until investigators found emails proving he wasn't just Susan's lawyer, but an active conspirator who'd taken 30% of every theft. Japanese authorities revoked his legal credentials on the spot, transforming him from counselor to criminal defendant in minutes. Susan, isolated in a Tokyo detention cell, finally experienced the powerlessness she'd inflicted on children for decades. No manipulation could work on investigators who didn't speak English as their first language. No tears swayed professionals who'd seen every performance. No threats carried weight when she held no cards. I received updates throughout the night from Mr. Nakamura, who'd stayed past midnight, coordinating with authorities. His personal investment went beyond professional duty. My younger sister was adopted, he explained during one call. She had loving parents who protected her inheritance until she came of age. Seeing what your adoptive mother attempted makes me sick. We'll ensure she never touches a cent of your parents' legacy. The next morning, international news picked up the story. American woman arrested in Tokyo for international adoption fraud scheme ran headlines across multiple outlets. Susan's picture, a disheveled mugshot replacing her carefully curated image, appeared on every major news site. The hotel charges alone totaled $47,000 in 2 days. Susan had assumed my money would cover her luxury crime spree. Instead, she'd added grand theft and fraud to her expanding charge sheet. The Park Hyatt banned her for life and shared her information with hospitality networks worldwide. But the true victory came through Agent Martinez's call that afternoon. Linda Ryan's confession is a goldmine. We've identified 17 victims, total and frozen, approximately $43 million in stolen assets. 3 more members of the network were arrested this morning based on his information. What happens to Susan now? Japan will hold her for financial crimes committed there while we build the international case. With evidence from multiple countries, she's looking at life in prison. No more bail, no more schemes, no more stolen children. I sat in my Chicago apartment watching the sun set over Lake Michigan. Somewhere in a Tokyo cell, Susan was learning what it felt like to be trapped helpless, dependent on the mercy of others. The woman who'd weaponized my need for family against me now faced a future defined by concrete walls and iron bars. My phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Nakamura. Your parents' accounts are secure and waiting for you. When you're ready, we'd be honored to help you claim your full inheritance. Their legacy wasn't just money, Miss Chen. They documented hopes and dreams for their daughter. Those documents survived, and they're yours to read whenever you're ready. 25 years after losing them, my parents were still finding ways to take care of me. And Susan, who tried to steal their final gift, had instead delivered herself into justice's hands through her own greed. The hotel had indeed received a call they didn't expect, but it was Susan who checked into a room she'd never leave. Agent Martinez's office had transformed into a war room. Whiteboards covered every wall filled with names, dates, and financial trails connecting decades of adoption fraud. At the center, Susan's photograph anchored a spiderweb of red string linking her to lawyers, social workers, financial advisors, and grieving orphans. I sat at the conference table with 3 strangers who felt like family. Marcus Williams had flown in from Houston, a tall, soft-spoken engineer whose eyes carried the same haunted look I saw in my own mirror. Jennifer Huang came from San Francisco, her venture capitalist success built, despite Susan's theft of her inheritance. David Thompson rounded out our group, the Miami real estate developer, who discovered Susan's fraud while settling his own adoptive father's estate. Thank you all for coming, Agent Martinez began. Ryan Mitchell's confession has blown this case wide open. What started as individual thefts is actually a coordinated criminal enterprise spanning 3 decades. Marcus leaned forward. How coordinated are we talking? Extremely. Susan Mitchell was one of 7 primary operatives. They called themselves the Placement Foundation, masquerading as a charitable organization focused on matching orphaned children with loving homes. In reality, they identified children with substantial inheritances and systematically stole their assets. Jennifer's hands clenched. 7 operatives. How many victims? We've confirmed 43 so far. Combined stolen assets exceed $200 million. The number hung in the air like a funeral bell. 43 children robbed of more than money, robbed of security, identity, and trust in the very people sworn to protect them. David spoke for the first time. My adoptive parents died thinking they'd spent my inheritance on my care. They went to their graves believing they were failures who'd squandered my future. That guilt killed them as surely as any disease. Mine, too, Jennifer added quietly. They remortgaged their house trying to pay for my college, not knowing Susan had already stolen my education fund. The stress caused my adoptive father's heart attack. The pattern is consistent, Martinez continued. They identified recent orphans with inheritances, facilitated quick adoptions through corrupt channels, then slowly drained the trusts while maintaining modest lifestyles to avoid suspicion. The children grew up believing their money went to their care, feeling guilty for being financial burdens. Marcus suddenly stood pacing to the window. There's something else, something I never told anyone. His voice carried shame mixed with fury. When I turned 18, Susan introduced me to a therapist, said it was to help with my adjustment issues. The therapist convinced me I had false memories of my biological parents, that my inheritance was smaller than I believed, that I should be grateful for whatever my adoptive family provided. Dr. Patricia Newcomb, Jennifer breathed, soft voice office full of orchids. Marcus spun around. You saw her too. We all did, David confirmed. She specialized in adoptive adjustment therapy. I'll bet she's part of this network. Martinez made rapid notes. This is new information. A therapist gaslighting victims to prevent them from questioning missing funds. We'll add her to the investigation immediately. There's more, I said, sharing what Robert had revealed about Samuel Morrison. He killed himself after discovering the theft. How many others didn't survive long enough to seek justice? Too many, Martinez admitted. We found 7 suspicious deaths among adoptees connected to this network, all ruled suicides or accidents, all occurring shortly after the victims turned 18 or 21, ages when they'd gained full access to their trusts. The room fell silent as we absorbed this horrifying possibility. Not just thieves, but potential murderers, eliminating children who asked too many questions. Marcus returned to his seat, pulling out a battered laptop. I've spent 5 years tracing financial patterns since discovering my theft. I'm a forensic accountant now. Figured if I couldn't recover my money, I'd learn to track others. I found something the FBI might have missed. He connected his laptop to the conference room screen, displaying a complex financial web that made Martinez's whiteboard look simplistic. The Placement Foundation had legitimate donations from major corporations, Marcus explained, tax write-offs for supporting orphans, but those donations went into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. From there, the money dispersed to personal accounts belonging to network members. They weren't just stealing from us, they were running a money laundering operation. The corporations knew, Jennifer asked. Doubtful. The foundation provided glossy annual reports showing happy adopted children thriving in loving homes. They even had us participate in photo shoots for donors. Remember those family fun days where professional photographers captured us looking grateful? We all remembered, staged happiness to convince donors their money was well spent while our actual inheritances vanished. Martinez studied Marcus's data with growing excitement. This changes everything. Money laundering across state lines, tax fraud, Raikyo predicates. We can charge the entire network as a criminal organization. Marcus, would you be willing to work with our forensic team? Already cleared my schedule for the next 6 months, Marcus confirmed. This ends now. Over the following hours, we pieced together our collective experiences, finding disturbing parallels. The same lawyers facilitating adoptions, the same financial advisors managing trusts, the same therapist convincing us our memories were false. Even the same photographer documenting our forced gratitude. They had a playbook, David realized, standardized approaches for different scenarios. If a child asked about their inheritance, redirect to gratitude. If they persisted, introduce Dr. Newcomb for therapy. If they still questioned things, as Samuel Morrison, I finished, and others like him. Agent Martinez's phone rang. She listened intently, her expression darkening. Susan Mitchell just attempted suicide in her Tokyo cell. Guards intervened in time. She's in the hospital under heavy sedation. Guilty conscience, Jennifer asked bitterly. More likely trying to avoid trial, Marcus suggested. Death before dishonor for a narcissist like her. But I knew better. She's not suicidal. This is calculated. She wants a psychiatric evaluation, hoping for reduced capacity defense. Don't let her manipulate the system like she manipulated us. Martinez nodded. Already ahead of you. The Japanese have dealt with fake suicide attempts before. She'll be evaluated but remain in custody regardless. As the meeting concluded, the four of us lingered. Strangers bound by shared trauma, finally understanding we weren't alone in our suffering. I'm starting a foundation, I announced. Using my recovered funds plus the damages from the civil suit, will provide legal resources for adoptees to audit their trusts, investigate suspicious handling of inheritances, and pursue justice against financial predators. Count me in, Marcus said immediately. I'll donate my forensic accounting services. I'll handle West Coast operations, Jennifer offered. My VC firm can provide office space and administrative support. And I'll manage real estate investments to keep it funded long-term, David added. No adopted child should discover at 25 that their future was stolen before they could talk. We exchanged contact information, forming an alliance born from pain, but strengthened by purpose. The network that had stolen our inheritances never imagined we'd unite against them. They'd counted on shame and isolation keeping us silent. Agent Martinez watched our impromptu foundation meeting with satisfaction. The placement foundation destroyed lives for profit. You're building something that will save them. Your parents would be proud. As I left the federal building, my phone rang. Aunt Patricia's daily check-in since we'd reconnected. Her voice carried warmth that Susan's had never possessed. How did it go, sweetheart? We're going to destroy them, I said simply. Every last member of their network will pay for what they've done. Good, Patricia said fiercely. Your parents were fighters, Linda. They built their success defending the defenseless through technology. You're carrying on their legacy in ways they'd never imagined, but would absolutely champion. That night, I dreamed of Margaret and Thomas Chen for the first time in 20 years. Not nightmares of loss, but visions of pride as their daughter transformed tragedy into triumph. The network had stolen money, but not spirit. They'd created victims, but forged warriors. And we were just getting started. 3 weeks after Susan's arrest in Tokyo, Ryan appeared at Morrison Tech, looking like a broken man. Security called up immediately. He wasn't on any approved visitor list, but he'd convinced them he needed to apologize to make amends. Against my better judgment, I agreed to see him in the lobby's glass conference room where security could monitor. He'd lost weight, his designer clothes replaced by a wrinkled polo shirt and khakis that had seen better days. The cocky brother who'd gloated over stolen plane tickets now slumped in a chair like a deflated balloon. "Hey, Linda!" His voice cracked. "Thank you for seeing me. I know I don't deserve it." I sat across from him, keeping the table between us. What do you want, Ryan? To apologize, to explain. God, Linda, I'm so sorry. I was stupid and greedy and let Mom manipulate me into something unforgivable. His performance might have been convincing if I hadn't watched him perfect fake tears for Susan's benefit over the years. I waited silently, letting him fill the void with more words. When the FBI questioned me, I told them everything, he continued. How Mom brought me into the scheme when I turned 16. How she showed me the accounts, promised me cars and trips if I helped. I was a kid, Linda. I didn't understand the magnitude of what we were doing. You understood enough to forge my signature, to plan international fraud, to call me charity case whenever Susan wasn't around to hear. He flinched. I know, I was cruel and entitled and everything you hate, but I'm different now. Facing prison changes a person. I want to help you get justice. The FBI says you already gave them names and details. Basic information, yes, but there's more I held back. Insurance, Mom called it. Details about hidden accounts, backup plans, people she hasn't named yet. I'll give you everything if you help me get a plea deal. Testify about my cooperation, ask for leniency. I'll even sign over my share of any recovered assets. I studied him carefully. Ryan had inherited Susan's calculating nature, but not her patience. He was desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. What makes you think I'd help you after everything you've done? Because you're not like us, he said urgently. You have a conscience, compassion. You wouldn't let your brother rot in prison if he was trying to make things right. There it was, the manipulation. Appeal to my better nature, invoke family bonds he'd never honored. Classic Susan training. I'll think about it, I lied smoothly. But first, I need to know you're serious. Write down everything you held back from the FBI. Every account, every person, every detail. Bring it to my office tomorrow at noon. Hope flashed across his face. You won't regret this, Linda. I promise. I'll prove I've changed. He practically ran from the building, probably eager to compile his insurance policy into a bargaining chip. I watched him go, then called building security. Pull all footage from tonight, especially the parking garage. Check if he met with anyone or accessed any restricted areas. And increase security tomorrow. He'll be back. My instincts proved correct. Security Chief Tom Bradley called within an hour. Ms. Chen, you were right to be suspicious. Ryan Mitchell entered through the parking garage 40 minutes before he appeared in the lobby. We found him on camera trying to access the executive elevator with a cloned keycard. When that failed, he attempted to pick the lock on your office door. What else? He met with 2 individuals in the parking structure. We're running facial recognition now, but one appears to be Gerald Hoffman's son. Marcus Hoffman, also a lawyer. They exchanged what looked like documents and electronic devices. The network was still active, still plotting. Ryan's remorse was as fake as Susan's suicide attempt. They were coordinating something. Increase security for tomorrow. When he returns, I want plainclothes officers nearby but not visible. Let him think he's succeeded in whatever he's planning. The next day arrived with unseasonable warmth for November in Chicago. I spent the morning with Agent Martinez briefing her on Ryan's visit and the security footage. She arranged for FBI surveillance and authorized recording equipment for our meeting. Ryan arrived precisely at noon, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a wire of his own, the outline visible to my trained eye under his pressed shirt. He dressed better today, projecting responsibility and trustworthiness. Too bad I knew his tells. I worked all night on this, he said, sliding the portfolio across my desk. Everything I know, every detail Mom kept from the FBI. I even included passwords for accounts she doesn't know I can access. I flipped through the documents, noting the careful organization. Bank accounts in the Bahamas, cryptocurrency wallets, names of judges Susan had cultivated. Valuable information if it was real, but I suspected poison pills mixed with truth. This is comprehensive, I acknowledged, but how do I know it's genuine? Test it, Ryan urged. Try any password check, any account. I'm holding nothing back. All right, let's start with this cryptocurrency wallet. Log in and show me. His smile faltered. I can't access it from here. Mom has security protocols. It needs to be from her registered devices. Which are where? Her laptop. It's still at the house. Lie number 1. I knew from the FBI that all Susan's devices had been confiscated as evidence. Ryan was fishing, trying to see what I knew. I see. What about this judge? Harold Blackwell. You claim he helped falsify adoption documents. Do you have proof? Not on me, but I know where Mom keeps the records, in a safety deposit box at First National. I could get them if you arrange access. Lie number 2. First National had already surrendered all of Susan's boxes to federal authorities. Ryan clearly didn't know how thoroughly the FBI had moved. Ryan, can I ask you something? Why did you really come here today? To make amends. No, I interrupted. The truth. Because I have security footage of you meeting with Marcus Hoffman last night. I know you tried to break into my office, so let's skip the performance and get to what you really want. His mask finally slipped completely. The remorseful brother vanished, replaced by Susan's true son, calculating and cornered. Fine. You want truth? Mom's network has resources you can't imagine. Judges, prosecutors, people embedded in the FBI itself. This investigation will disappear. Evidence will be lost. And she'll walk free within a year. Unless what? Unless you pay $10 million to make it all go away. You'll get your inheritance will disappear. Everyone wins. That's the offer. Take it or spend the next decade in court watching the case fall apart. I leaned back, pretending to consider, while the FBI wire captured every word. And if I refuse, then things get complicated. Your company might face SEC investigations for financial irregularities. Your apartment building might discover code violations. Your friend Sarah might find her law license under review. Mom's reach extends far beyond prison walls. Are you threatening me, Ryan? I'm explaining reality. You destroyed our family over money. Now that same money can buy your peace. 10 million is nothing compared to what you'll inherit. Our family was built on lies and theft. I didn't destroy it. I exposed it. Ryan stood abruptly, his patience exhausted. You have 48 hours to decide. The Swiss account information is real. Transfer the money there and this ends. Otherwise, you'll learn what Susan Mitchell's true power looks like. He stormed out, leaving his portfolio behind. I waited until security confirmed his departure, then called Agent Martinez. Did you get all that? I asked. Every word. Extortion, conspiracy, threats of witness intimidation. Ryan just added another decade to his sentence. We're arresting him now, along with Marcus Hoffman. The account he provided, we've been monitoring it for weeks. It's connected to the broader network. Within an hour, news broke of Ryan's arrest in the Morrison Tech parking garage. He'd been so confident in his plan that he'd waited around, probably planning to intimidate employees or plant evidence. Instead, FBI agents surrounded his car and pulled him out in handcuffs as local news cameras rolled. The portfolio he'd left contained enough genuine information to pursue 3 more network members mixed with disinformation meant to mislead investigators, but the FBI's forensic accountants working with Marcus Williams easily separated fact from fiction. That evening, I received a call from the Federal Detention Center. Ryan wanting his one phone call to be with me was predictably dramatic. You set me up, he accused. You set yourself up. I just gave you the rope. This isn't over. Mom has plans within plans. You think you've won, but you're just playing checkers while she plays chess. Ryan, she's in a Japanese prison cell trying to fake mental illness while you're heading for federal lockup. The network is crumbling. The game is over. Is it check your company email, Linda? Check Sarah's bar association status. Check your building's inspection records. Even from prison, even through intermediaries, she can reach you. The line went dead. I immediately called my contacts, but Ryan's threats proved empty. Morrison Tech's finances were impeccable. Sarah's license remained spotless. My building passed all inspections with flying colors. The network's power had been real once, but like all corrupt systems, it crumbled when exposed to light. Ryan's desperate extortion attempt was the last gasp of a dying criminal enterprise, and he just provided evidence to bury it forever. Agent Martinez called with a final update. Ryan's arrest led to 3 more network members trying to flee. We caught them all at various airports. Your brother's incompetence just helped us close the entire ring. As I sat in my office watching the sunset paint Chicago's skyline gold, I felt the strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Ryan could have chosen differently. He could have been a real brother, stood against Susan's corruption, helped protect the sister she'd manipulated and stolen from. Instead, he'd chosen greed over family threats, over redemption. He'd proved that blood alone doesn't make someone worth saving. Sometimes the most dangerous betrayals come from those who share your name, but never shared your values. Susan had raised him in her image, and now they'd share matching federal sentences. A twisted family reunion behind bars where manipulation couldn't overcome justice and threats couldn't replace truth. The network that had stolen millions from innocent children would end where it began, with a mother and son who'd chosen crime over compassion, greed over love, and ultimately prison over freedom. Jennifer Walsh stood at the head of Morrison Tech's boardroom, her silver hair catching the morning light as 30 executives settled into leather chairs. I sat to her right, trying to steady my nerves while she called the emergency meeting to order. "Oh, thank you all for coming on short notice," Jennifer began. "I've asked Linda Chen to join us because her situation has implications for our entire corporate family. Linda, would you share what you're comfortable discussing?" I stood on legs that felt surprisingly steady. These people had been my colleagues for 7 years, watching me rise from junior analyst to senior financial director. They deserved to know why FBI agents had arrested my brother in their parking garage. "Many of you know I was adopted," I began. "What you don't know is that my adoptive mother has been stealing from me since I was 5 years old. She took $2.8 million from my biological parents' trust fund, and last week tried to flee to Japan to access another $12 million in overseas accounts." Shocked murmurs rippled through the room. I continued laying out the network structure, the decades of theft, the 43 victims identified so far. When I explained Ryan's extortion attempt and threats against the company, several board members' expressions darkened. "He threatened SEC investigations against Morrison Tech," asked David Park, our chief legal officer. "Among other things, the FBI has him on recording claiming his mother's network could manufacture financial irregularities to punish anyone who helped me." Jennifer raised her hand for silence. Linda brought this to my attention immediately. "Our internal audit team has conducted a thorough review. I'm pleased to report that our finances are impeccable as always. However, this situation raises important concerns about protecting our employees from external threats." "What kind of protection are we talking about?" asked Maria Santos, head of human resources. Jennifer's expression carried steel beneath its professional polish. "Before I answer that, I need to share something personal. 35 years ago, I was in a similar position to Linda. My adoptive family stole my inheritance and used emotional manipulation to keep me silent. I spent decades believing I was worthless, that I owed them everything." The boardroom went completely silent. Jennifer Walsh, our formidable CEO who'd built Morrison Tech from a startup to a Fortune 500 company, had never shared personal history before. "I escaped through education and hard work," she continued, "but I never got justice. The statute of limitations expired while I was still finding my voice. When Linda confided in HR about her situation, it felt like the universe was giving me a chance to do for someone else what no one did for me." She clicked a remote, bringing up a presentation on the wall screen. I propose we create the Morrison Tech Employee Protection Initiative, a comprehensive program providing legal support counseling services and security resources for employees facing family financial abuse, stalking, or extortion. The budget appeared on screen. $5 million annually, including retained law firms specializing in family fraud, enhanced security protocols and personal protection services, confidential counseling with trauma-informed therapists, emergency relocation assistance if needed, paid leave for court appearances and recovery. This seems excessive for one situation, ventured Thomas Reed from finance. Maria Santos turned to him sharply. One situation. 20% of our employee assistance calls involve family financial conflicts. We've just never had resources to offer beyond basic counseling. This could help dozens of our people. It's also smart business, added David Park. If criminal networks think they can threaten our employees to leverage silence, we need to show immediate, overwhelming response. This protects our corporate integrity as much as our people. Jennifer called for a vote. 28 hands rose in favor, 2 abstained, none opposed. Motion carried, Jennifer announced. Linda Morrison Tech stands behind you completely. Now, let's discuss the immediate threat. Over the next hour, we developed a comprehensive response plan. IT Security would monitor for any cyber attacks attempting to plant evidence. Legal would prepare cease and desist orders against anyone spreading false information about our finances. HR would brief all employees on the situation, emphasizing that any approach from Ryan's associates should be reported immediately. There's one more thing, Jennifer said as the meeting wound down. Linda, I've spoken with the board's compensation committee. Your dedication to this company while dealing with personal trauma deserves recognition. We're promoting you to Executive Vice President of Financial Operations, effective immediately. I stared at her in shock. Jennifer, I don't want pity promotion. This isn't pity, she interrupted. You've managed our entire financial infrastructure while being gaslit, threatened, and emotionally abused. You've maintained perfect departmental performance while your family literally tried to steal your identity. That shows leadership under pressure that we need at the executive level. The board members nodded agreement. David Park added, plus, your forensic accounting skills uncovered a multi-state criminal enterprise. Those are exactly the skills we need protecting Morrison Tech's interests. As the meeting concluded, colleagues approached with personal words of support. Several quietly shared their own stories of family financial abuse, thanking me for bringing the issue to light. But the most meaningful conversation came when Jennifer asked me to stay behind. I want to show you something, she said, pulling out a worn photograph. This is me at 25, the day I graduated from business school. See that woman in the background? That's my adoptive mother. She showed up demanding I sign over my first job signing bonus to repay her for raising me. What did you do? Gave her the money, and the next bonus, and the next. It took me 10 years to break free, and by then, she'd taken almost $500,000. But you know what building Morrison Tech became my revenge. Every success proved she was wrong about my worth. She's still alive, living in a nursing home in Florida. I pay for her care. The good kind, not the luxury kind. It's more than she deserves, but allows me to sleep peacefully. Success is the best revenge, Linda, but justice is even better. You're getting both. That afternoon, an all-staff email went out from Jennifer personally. Morrison Tech family. Today we face a situation that tests our values as a company. One of our own, Linda Chen, has been targeted by criminals who believe they can threaten and intimidate their way to silence. They are wrong. When you join Morrison Tech, you join a family that protects its own. Effective immediately, any employee facing threats, extortion, or family financial abuse can access our new Employee Protection Initiative. You are not alone. Your company stands with you. To anyone who thinks they can harm our people, Morrison Tech has resources you cannot imagine and resolve you cannot break. We will pursue every legal avenue to protect our family. Stand strong, stand together. Jennifer Walsh, CEO. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Employees from every department reached out with support. The security team volunteered overtime to ensure building safety. The legal department offered pro bono hours for any personal protection orders needed. But the most unexpected support came from our clients. Word spread through professional networks, and by evening, I had messages from Fortune 100 CEOs expressing solidarity. 3 major firms offered their security consultants. 2 tech giants shared intelligence about suspected network members in their industries. Ryan's threats had backfired spectacularly. Instead of isolating me, his extortion attempt had mobilized a corporate army. The network might have had judges and social workers, but we had something more powerful. A business community that understood the value of justice and the importance of protecting those who drove their success. Agent Martinez called that evening with an update. The network is panicking. Encrypted communications are lighting up with members trying to distance themselves from Ryan's extortion attempt. Several are offering to testify in exchange for plea deals. Your company's response has them terrified. Jennifer doesn't make idle threats, I confirmed. When she says Morrison Tech will pursue every legal avenue, she means it. Our legal department has more resources than most federal agencies. It's working. 2 more arrests today, including the judge Ryan mentioned. Turns out he was already under investigation for bribery. Ryan's threats gave us the final evidence needed. As I prepared to leave the office, my new executive assistant knocked. "Ms. Chen, there's a delivery for you." A courier had brought a package from Jennifer's personal attorney. Inside was a leather portfolio containing documents I never expected to see. "Linda," Jennifer's handwritten note explained, "I hired investigators to research your biological parents for the company archives. Margaret and Thomas Chen were pioneers in encryption technology. Their patents laid groundwork for systems Morrison Tech uses today. In a way, your parents helped build this company. Their daughter protecting our financial infrastructure feels like destiny. These are copies of their papers, photos, and personal notes the investigators found. Your inheritance isn't just money. It's a legacy of innovation and integrity." I sat at my new executive desk, tears streaming as I read my parents' work for the first time. Technical specifications mixed with personal notes. Margaret's handwriting in margins. This could help protect vulnerable people's data. Thomas's calculations, including ethical considerations alongside mathematical proofs. They'd been brilliant, principled people who'd wanted their work to make the world safer. Now their daughter was using skills they'd never taught her to bring justice they'd never see. But somehow, through Morrison Tech's support and Jennifer's understanding, their dreams and mine had aligned. The network had stolen money but couldn't steal destiny. They'd tried to break me but instead forged someone stronger. And now, backed by a corporate family that chose protection over profit, I was ready to end their reign of terror permanently. Susan and Ryan had threatened to destroy my professional life. Instead, they'd elevated me to a position where I could ensure no Morrison Tech employee would ever face such threats alone. The woman who'd walked out of a toxic Thanksgiving dinner was gone. In her place stood an executive vice president with resources allies and the full weight of a Fortune 500 company behind her. The network had made a fatal error. They'd threatened someone who'd learned to transform pain into power, theft into triumph. And unlike them, I didn't stand alone. The call from Switzerland came at 3 a.m, jolting me from restless sleep. The voice on the other end spoke careful English with a German accent. "Ms. Chen, this is Director Heinrich Müller from Credit Suisse Private Banking. I apologize for the hour, but we have an urgent matter regarding accounts established by Margaret and Thomas Chen." I sat up fully alert. "What kind of urgent matter?" "We've been monitoring news of your situation. When we saw reports of Susan Mitchell's arrest for inheritance theft, it triggered our dormant account protocols. Your parents established a trust, that we've been safeguarding for 23 years. However, someone attempted to access it yesterday using sophisticated forgery. Who? The attempt originated from Hong Kong, routed through servers in Russia. Very professional, but our security systems caught discrepancies in the documentation. Ms. Chen, we need you to come to Zurich immediately. There are aspects of your inheritance that cannot be discussed over unsecured lines. I booked a flight for that evening, informing Agent Martinez of this development. She assigned 2 FBI liaisons to accompany me, concerned about international jurisdiction and my safety. During the flight, I researched Heinrich Müller, 20-year veteran of Swiss banking specialized in protecting high-value accounts from fraud. His reputation was impeccable, which made the urgency of his call more concerning. Zurich greeted us with pristine snow and alpine air that felt impossibly clean after Chicago's urban atmosphere. A discreet Mercedes waited at the airport, taking us not to Credit Suisse's public offices, but to a private facility outside the city. The building looked more like a mountain fortress than a bank. Director Mueller met us at security, a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming. Agents Reynolds and Foster, welcome. Please follow me to our secure conference facility. We descended 3 floors underground, passing through biometric scanners and armed guards. The Swiss took financial security to levels that made American banks look casual. In a windowless conference room, Mueller presented documents that changed everything I thought I knew about my parents' preparations. Margaret and Thomas Chen weren't just software engineers, he began. They were pioneers in cryptographic security who consulted for governments and financial institutions worldwide. They established accounts in 7 countries each with different maturation triggers and security protocols. 7 countries, I managed. Dodi, Switzerland, Singapore, Japan, Germany, Luxembourg, Grand Cayman, and New Zealand. Combined value today exceeds $40 million, but the monetary value is secondary to what else they preserved. He produced a sealed envelope marked with my name in my mother's handwriting. Inside were photographs, letters, and a small key. They knew someone was targeting them, Mueller explained. These documents suggest they discovered a network that identified wealthy couples with young children orchestrating accidents to create profitable orphans. Your parents couldn't prove it, but they took precautions. The letters were dated 2 weeks before their deaths. My mother's words blurred through tears. Our beloved Linda, if you're reading this, our worst fears have come true. We've discovered something terrible. People who profit from creating orphans. We've gone to authorities, but without proof they dismiss us as paranoid new parents. So we're taking precautions. This key opens a deposit box in Singapore containing evidence we've gathered. The accounts in various countries aren't just inheritance. They're a trail. Each withdrawal attempt will trigger investigations, alerting authorities to examine the circumstances. We pray we're wrong, that you'll read this at 40 while we embarrass you at family dinners. But if we're not, if someone has taken us from, you know this, you were loved beyond measure. We've done everything possible to protect you and expose those who would harm children for money. Live brilliantly, darling girl. Make the world better than we left it. All our love, Mama and Baba. The FBI agents exchanged grim looks. This confirmed their worst suspicions about the network's origins. There's more, Mueller continued. The Hong Kong access attempt triggered our investigation protocols. We've identified the source, a law firm called Hoffman, Chen and Associates. Chen, I asked, startled by my family name being used. A false appropriation to establish credibility. The firm specializes in inheritance recovery for adoptive families. They've attempted similar frauds across Asia, always targeting accounts belonging to deceased couples with adopted children. Agent Reynolds spoke up. Director Mueller, would Credit Suisse be willing to cooperate with an international investigation? Already in progress. When Ms. Chen arrives in Singapore and opens that deposit box, it will activate what her parents called Project Lighthouse, a coordinated release of evidence to law enforcement in 12 countries. They planned all this 23 years ago, Foster asked, incredulous. Margaret Chen was a cryptographic genius who designed security systems for intelligence agencies. She understood how to create dead man switches and evidence trails that would survive decades. Every attempt to steal from these accounts has created digital footprints we've been collecting. The next 48 hours became a whirlwind of international travel and revelations. In Singapore, the deposit box contained hard drives with encrypted data photographs of suspicious individuals following my parents and correspondence with a private investigator who died in a mugging 1 week after my parents' accident. The evidence painted a horrifying picture. The network hadn't started with Susan Mitchell. She was second or third generation. The original founders had identified a profitable niche in the 1970s wealthy couples with significant life insurance and investment portfolios who had young children but no extended family. Create an accident. Facilitate a quick adoption through corrupted channels. Drain the inheritance while the children grew up grateful for any home at all. It was evil, wrapped in charity's clothing. In Tokyo, the accounts my parents had established were more than financial instruments. They'd hired journalists to investigate suspicious orphan patterns, funded lawyers who questioned adoption irregularities, and supported researchers studying financial crimes against children. Even in death, they'd been fighting for justice. But it was in Germany where we found the smoking gun. The law firm attempting to access my accounts had made a fatal error. They'd used a digital signature traced back to Gerald Hoffman's original computer, the same machine containing 20 years of correspondence about inheritance recovery operations. German authorities, famous for their thoroughness, had frozen the firm's assets and arrested 17 employees within hours of the evidence surfacing. Their computers contained a database of over 300 successful recovery operations spanning 4 decades. Each entry was a child robbed, a fortune stolen, a life derailed. But what sickened me most were the notes rating adoptive families by their exploitation potential and children by their compliance probability. I'd been marked as highly compliant, emotionally vulnerable, excellent long-term prospect. The international nature of the crimes created jurisdictional complexities, but also opportunities. Countries that might have dragged their feet on individual cases suddenly faced pressure from multiple governments to act. Swiss banks froze suspicious accounts. Singapore arrested 3 lawyers. Japan expanded their investigation beyond Susan to her connections throughout Asia. During a brief return to Chicago between countries, I met with the other victims via secure video conference. Marcus had been analyzing the German database, creating visualizations of the network's spread. "It's like looking at a cancer metastasizing," he said, sharing his screen. "They started in America, but spread globally as international adoption became easier. The same families appear across generations. Parents teaching children the family business of robbing orphans." Jennifer Huang had been investigating the Asian connections. I found 12 Vietnamese orphans targeted after the war, 15 from Cambodia, 23 from China during the one-child policy era. They specifically sought children from tragedies, wars, natural disasters, political upheavals. Chaos made documentation easier to forge. David Thompson had the worst news. The database includes a terminated category, 137 entries of adoptees who failed to mature to profitability. Most died between 18 and 21. "Murdered," I said flatly. "Say what it was. They murdered children who questioned missing money." We sat with that horror understanding that Samuel Morrison hadn't been an isolated tragedy, but part of a systematic elimination of problems. "Then we stopped them all," Marcus said quietly. "Every name, every account, every conspirator. We have resources they never imagined. An international coalition of authorities, evidence spanning decades, and 40 million reasons to see this through. As I prepared to board yet another flight, my phone rang. Aunt Patricia checking in as always. "Are you safe, sweetheart?" "I'm protected by FBI agents and surrounded by Swiss bankers who treat security like a religion. I'm safe." "That's not what I meant. Are you safe in here?" I could picture her gesturing to her heart. I considered lying providing easy comfort, but Patricia deserved truth. No, every revelation breaks me a little more. Knowing my parents suspected they'd be murdered, knowing they spent their last weeks trying to protect me, it's almost too much. "Almost?" Patricia repeated, "but not quite. You know why, because Margaret was my brother's equal in every way, including stubbornness. She knew if they failed to stop these monsters, their daughter would finish the job, and she was right." That night in my Zurich hotel, I video called Director Mueller one last time before the final phase. "Your parents' 40 million will be released to you tomorrow," he confirmed. "But I should mention, they included specific instructions. 10% was earmarked for victims of adoption fraud. They wanted other children protected if theirs couldn't be." Of course they did. Even while planning for their own possible murder, they'd thought of other victims. The network had killed them for money, never understanding that Margaret and Thomas Chen's true wealth lay in their compassion and foresight. "I'll honor their wishes," I promised. "Every cent will go toward ending this network and supporting its victims." "They would be proud," Mueller said simply. "In 30 years of private banking, I've never seen such elegant revenge. They turned their murders into the network's destruction, just delayed by 2 decades. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more arrests, more justice, delayed but not denied. The network that had started with greed and grown through cruelty would end with a daughter honoring parents she barely remembered by protecting children she'd never meet. Susan Mitchell thought she'd stolen my inheritance. In reality, she'd activated a trap my parents had set from beyond the grave. Their love had transcended death, their preparation had survived decades, and their daughter would ensure their sacrifice meant something. The network had created orphans for profit. They'd never imagined those orphans would grow up to destroy them. The Naperville house felt like a tomb when I returned with FBI evidence technicians. Yellow tape marked it as a crime scene, but Agent Martinez had authorized my supervised search for additional documentation. 2 weeks had passed since the international revelations, and the investigation needed every possible lead. "We'll start in the attic," I told Agent Kim Davies, the lead technician. Susan was meticulous about keeping records. She called it insurance. The attic stairs creaked under our weight, releasing the smell of old wood and forgotten years. Dozens of boxes lined the walls, each labeled in Susan's precise handwriting: tax returns, medical records, school files. But behind those mundane labels, I suspected darker secrets waited. Davies and her team photographed everything before we began. In the third box marked charitable donations, we found the first bombshell: adoption papers for children I'd never heard of. "Michael Harrison, age 7, Davies read, "adopted 1994 biological parents deceased in hotel fire." And here, Sarah Peterson, aged 5, adopted 1997 parents killed in boating accident. My hands shook as I examined the documents. I came to the family in 2001. These children predate me, but I never heard their names mentioned. There were no photos, no references to siblings who'd left home. We kept searching. Bank statements showed large deposits following each adoption, then steady withdrawals over 3 to 4 years. Then nothing. The children simply vanished from financial records. Agent Davies called another technician from across the attic. "You need to see this." Hidden behind Christmas decoration boxes was a filing cabinet I'd never noticed. Inside manila folders contained surveillance photos, private investigator reports, and correspondence that chilled my blood. The folders were labeled MH. resolved, SP, resolved, LC, active. My folder was thickest, documenting 23 years of observation, report after report analyzing my psychological state, my attachment to the family, my likelihood of questioning missing funds. The most recent entry, dated 2 months ago, concluded, subject remains unaware and compliant. Recommend continuation of current approach. But the resolved folders told a different story. Michael Harrison had started questioning his trust fund at 17. The reports tracked his growing suspicion, his attempts to hire lawyers, his increasing noncompliance. The final entry was a newspaper clipping, local teen dies in car accident. Sarah Peterson's file showed similar escalation. She'd discovered financial discrepancies at 18, confronted Susan threatened legal action. Her final entry, college students' apparent suicide shocks community. This is evidence of murder, Davies said grimly. We need to get these to homicide detectives immediately. But I was already opening another box labeled innocuously as holiday cards. Inside were documents that predated Susan's marriage to Robert. Adoption papers from the 1970s when she was barely 21. 3 children adopted and resolved before she'd perfected her methods. She'd been doing this for over 40 years, I whispered. How many children did she kill? Davies called for additional units while I kept searching. In Susan's bedroom closet, behind designer clothes that my inheritance had purchased, I found a wall safe Robert hadn't mentioned. The combination was pathetically predictable. Ryan's birthday. Inside were passports under various names, cash in multiple currencies, and a leather journal filled with Susan's handwriting. I opened it with latex-gloved hands, reading entries that spanned decades. March 15th, 1978. First placement successful. Child more trusting than expected. Need to refine emotional manipulation techniques for faster bonding. August 2nd, 1983. MT becoming problematic. Asking about parents' business. May need early resolution. Research making accidents look natural. December 20th, 1994. Perfected the approach. Children who experience trauma bond faster, question less. Target recent orphans only, preferably from violent deaths. They're grateful for any stability. June 10th, 2001. LC acquisition complete. Parent's death was messier than planned but effective. Child traumatized enough to ensure compliance. Projected return excellent. I dropped the journal, my stomach heaving. Susan hadn't just stolen from orphans, she'd helped create them. My parents' suspicions were confirmed in their killer's own handwriting. Davies bagged the journal as evidence while I stumbled to the bathroom. 23 years of calling this woman mom, of trying to earn her love, of believing I owed her gratitude for saving me from foster care, when all along she'd orchestrated my parents' murder for profit. Mrs. Chen Davies found me sitting on the bathroom floor. We found something else. There's a hidden room behind the basement wall. The basement had always been Susan's domain, supposedly containing her home office for the consulting business, but behind a false panel was a narrow room I'd never imagined existed. Inside were filing cabinets, computers, and walls covered with charts tracking dozens of children across the country. Each chart showed a child's photo, their parents' net worth, trust fund details, and a timeline. Green highlights marked successful extractions, children whose inheritances had been fully drained. Yellow indicated active operations. Red marked early resolutions. There were so many red marks. This is a serial killer's trophy room, Davies breathed, but for financial murderers. On the desk sat a laptop still powered on. The screen showed an encrypted messaging system with recent activity, messages from lawyers, social workers, financial advisors. The network frantically trying to salvage operations after Susan's arrest. But one message thread made my blood freeze. Package LC requires immediate resolution. Subject has compromised entire operation. Authorized terminal action. The message was dated yesterday. They were planning to kill me. Davies immediately called for protective custody while I scrolled through older messages. The casual discussions of murder made me physically ill. Children reduced to packages, deaths rated by believability profits, calculated against risk. One thread discussed improvements to their methods. Car accidents too suspicious when multiple subjects use same resolution. Vary approaches. Suicides for depressed teens, overdoses for struggling students, accidents for athletic types. Match the method to the profile. Another analyzed police response times in different cities, determining optimal locations for resolutions that would face minimal investigation. But the worst discovery came in a subfolder labeled Next Generation. Inside were profiles of network members' children being groomed to continue operations. Ryan's name appeared frequently with notes about his natural aptitude for manipulation and lack of empathy, making him ideal for terminal resolutions. Susan hadn't just recruited her son, she'd specifically shaped him to become a killer. "We need to evacuate," Davies announced. "If they're planning action against you, this house isn't safe." As we prepared to leave, I grabbed one last item, a photo album I'd noticed in the hidden room. Inside were pictures of all the children Susan had adopted over the decades. Smiling faces at birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations, normal scenes hiding monstrous truth. But I recognized several faces. Michael Harrison looked exactly like a young man I'd seen at Java Joe's coffee shop. Sarah Peterson bore striking resemblance to a woman who worked at my gym. Heart racing, I compared photos to recent surveillance images in the files. They were the same people, older with different hair and names, but unmistakably alive. "Davies," I called urgently. "They're not dead. At least some of the resolved children are still alive." She examined the evidence, understanding dawning. "They faked the deaths, made the children disappear rather than risk actual murder investigations." "But where did they go?" We found answers in Susan's journal entries describing a relocation program for children who discovered the truth but could be intimidated into silence. Threatened with death or worse, they accepted new identities and exile in exchange for their lives. Susan had created a diaspora of stolen children scattered across the country, under assumed names too terrified to speak out. "We need to find them," I said. "They're witnesses. They can testify about what happened to them." Davies agreed, but first we had to ensure my safety. As we left the house, FBI agents surrounded us, escorting me to a secure location. The network's threat had elevated me from witness to active target. That night in the safe house, I couldn't stop thinking about those photos. Children who'd sat where I sat, trusted the woman I'd trusted, lost everything I'd almost lost. But they discovered the truth sooner and paid an even steeper price. Not just theft, but erasure of their very identities. Agent Martinez arrived with updates. "Based on the evidence you found, we've opened murder investigations in 6 states. The journal entries are particularly damning. Susan documented premeditation for multiple homicides." "What about the surviving children?" "We're tracking them down. Michael Harrison is indeed working at a coffee shop in Evanston under the name Mark Henderson. Sarah Peterson goes by Susan Palmer, now personal trainer in Naperville. They never left the area. Susan wanted them close enough to monitor. They've been here all along, watching me live the life that was stolen from them." "Appears so." Susan liked keeping trophies, and what better trophy than broken children too scared to speak? We're approaching them carefully. They've been hiding for decades and won't trust easily. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Martinez arrived with 2 people whose faces I recognized from those photos. Michael Harrison. Now Mark was 34 with premature gray streaking his hair. Sarah Peterson, living as Susan Palmer, was 31 with the hyper-vigilant posture of someone always ready to run. "When we heard about your case, we knew it was time." Michael said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. 20 years of silence, of looking over our shoulders, of letting her win. But seeing you fight back, we want to help. Sarah nodded, tears streaming. She told us our families would be killed if we ever spoke out, that she had people everywhere who would hurt anyone we cared about. We were children. We believed her. But you survived, I said. That took incredible strength. Surviving isn't living, Michael replied. We've been ghosts afraid of our own shadows. When the FBI told us she was finally in custody, that her network was crumbling, it's like waking up from a nightmare. Over the following hours, they shared their stories. The slow realization that money was missing. The confrontations with Susan that turned threatening. The men who appeared at their schools following them home, making it clear they were always watched. The final ultimatum: disappear or die. She had it all planned, Sarah explained. New identities, waiting apartments rented under fake names, even jobs arranged through network contacts. One day we were high school seniors planning for college, the next, we were nobody starting over with nothing but the clothes on our backs. She stole our names too, Michael added bitterly. Our histories, our connections to our birth parents. We couldn't even visit their graves without risking exposure. But they'd survived, and more importantly, they'd remembered. Names, dates, faces of network members who'd facilitated their disappearances. Financial advisors who'd helped steal their inheritances. Social workers who'd looked the other way. Judges who'd signed fraudulent documents. We kept records, Sarah revealed, hidden in safety deposit boxes under our fake names, evidence we hoped might matter someday if someone ever challenged her. Their evidence, combined with what we'd found in the house, created an overwhelming case. The network had operated like organized crime, with Susan as a high-ranking member, rather than the mastermind we'd assumed. Above her were founders who'd turned child theft into an industry. There's something else, Michael said hesitantly. We weren't the only ones who survived. Susan mentioned others during our exit interviews. Children from different states, different handlers. She called it the Underground Railroad for ungrateful brats. How many? At least 20 that she referenced, maybe more. All living under assumed names, all terrified into silence. But Linda, if we can find them, if we can unite them... An army of witnesses. I finished. Too many to silence, too much evidence to suppress. Sarah pulled out a worn notebook. I've been tracking patterns in obituaries, looking for our kind of deaths. Adopted children dying young in accidents or suicides. But also looking for gaps, cases where bodies were never found or identified. I think I've located at least 6 more survivors in the Midwest alone. We spent days building a database, cross-referencing suspicious deaths with missing person reports, adoption records with financial fraud cases. Slowly, a map emerged of children scattered like seeds across the country, each nursing trauma and stolen futures, each a potential key to bringing down the entire network. The safe house became a war room. Michael and Sarah moved in partly for protection, but mostly for the work. We were no longer just victims, but investigators using our unique understanding of Susan's methods to uncover what trained agents might miss. She made one mistake, Sarah observed late one night as we pored over documents. She kept us alive. Whatever twisted psychology made her prefer psychological torture to murder, it's going to be her downfall. Our parents would be proud, I said, thinking of all the biological families who'd never know their children survived. Michael smiled sadly. Mine were teachers. They'd have loved knowing their son grew up to expose corruption, even if it took 20 years of hiding first. Mine were doctors, Sarah added, pediatricians who specialized in helping traumatized children. Ironic that their daughter became one. We were all our parents' children, carrying forward their values despite the years and trauma. The network had tried to erase us, but we'd endured. Now it was time to reclaim not just our inheritances, but our identities, our histories, and most importantly, our voices. The family secrets Susan had hidden were emerging like bodies from shallow graves. Each revelation brought pain, but also purpose. We weren't just seeking justice for ourselves anymore, but for all the children, living and dead, whose lives she'd destroyed for profit. And we were just getting started. The federal courthouse in Chicago buzzed with media attention as the most significant adoption fraud trial in American history began. 6 months of investigation had culminated in this moment. United States versus Susan Mitchell et al. The et al. Represented 47 co-defendants across 12 states, the entire network exposed and indicted. I sat in the prosecution section between Michael and Sarah, our little family of survivors, having grown to include 23 others we'd helped locate. Behind us, 3 rows filled with victims from across the decades, some gray-haired having lost their inheritances in the 1980s, others barely out of college, recent targets of the network's evolved methods. Susan entered in shackles, her designer wardrobe replaced by federal prison khaki. The months in custody had stripped away her careful facade. Without expensive treatments and cosmetics, she looked like what she was, a 70-year-old woman who'd spent a lifetime destroying children for money. Ryan sat at a separate defense table, his deal for testimony having fallen through, when evidence proved he'd actively participated in planning murders. He caught my eye once, his expression mixing hatred with something that might have been regret. I felt nothing looking at him. He'd chosen his path. Lead prosecutor Diane Morrison opened with devastating simplicity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about the systematic murder and robbery of children. Not metaphorically, but literally. The defendants identified wealthy parents, orchestrated their deaths, facilitated adoptions, and stole inheritances worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When children questioned missing money, they were either murdered or terrorized into hiding. This network operated for 43 years, destroying over 200 young lives for profit. Susan's attorney, Patricia Vance, tried to paint her client as a misguided caregiver. Susan Mitchell loved these children. Yes, she managed their finances, but always with their best interests at heart. These were troubled orphans who needed stability. Any financial irregularities were honest mistakes, not criminal intent. The gallery erupted in bitter laughter from survivors. Judge Harrison called for order, but his expressions suggested he shared their disbelief. Morrison's first witness was Michael Harrison. 20 years of silence ended as he took the stand, revealing his true name for the first time since high school. "Tell us about discovering your trust fund was empty," Morrison prompted. Michael's voice carried steady strength. "I was 17 applying for college. I needed my social security number for financial aid forms and found adoption documents in Susan's desk. They showed my biological parents had left $4.7 million in trust for my education and future. When I checked with the bank, less than $10,000 remained." "What happened when you confronted Susan Mitchell?" She laughed, at first said I was misunderstanding the documents. When I insisted on seeing bank statements, her whole demeanor changed. She became cold, calculating, told me ungrateful children who asked too many questions had accidents. Car brakes failed, drug interactions occurred, swimmers drowned. "Did you believe these threats?" "Not initially, but then men started following me. My girlfriend received photos of us together with her face X'd out. My best friend's parents got anonymous letters claiming I was dealing drugs. The message was clear. They could destroy anyone I cared about. So what did you do?" Susan gave me a choice: die in a staged accident or accept a new identity and disappear. I was 17, terrified and alone. I chose to live. Susan's defense tried cross-examination, but Michael held firm. 20 years of preparation for this moment showed in his calm recitation of dates, places, threats. When Vance suggested he'd misunderstood parental concern for threats, Michael produced a recording he'd secretly made during his final meeting with Susan. Her voice filled the courtroom. "You have 72 hours to decide, Michael. Death or disappearance. Choose wisely. Your girlfriend's such a pretty thing, it would be a shame if her car had mechanical problems." The jury recoiled. Several looked at Susan with open disgust. Sarah testified next, detailing similar experiences. Then came witnesses the defense hadn't expected. Network members who'd flipped for immunity. Gerald Hoffman's former secretary, armed with decades of records. A social worker who'd facilitated fraudulent adoptions, haunted by guilt. A financial advisor who'd laundered stolen funds, desperate to reduce his sentence. Each witness added layers to the network's structure. What emerged was a criminal organization rivaling any drug cartel, but dealing in children's futures instead of narcotics. On day 3, I took the stand. Morrison walked me through discovering the theft, finding evidence of my parents' murder, uncovering the network's scope. But the most powerful moment came when she asked about impact. "How has this affected your life, Ms. Chen?" I looked directly at Susan. "I spent 23 years believing I was a burden. Every achievement felt like it wasn't enough to repay the debt of being saved. I shaped my entire life around gratitude to someone who murdered my parents and stole my future. The money is just paper. She stole my identity, my connections to my heritage, my ability to trust. She made me grateful for abuse." "But you survived." "Yes, but survival isn't free. Every relationship is colored by wondering if people care about me or what I can provide. Every kindness feels transactional. She didn't just steal money. She stole my ability to believe in unconditional love." Susan's mask finally cracked. For just a moment, I saw something in her eyes. Not remorse, but frustration that her programming hadn't held, that one victim had broken free and brought down her empire. The defense's cross-examination tried to paint me as vindictive, pursuing a vendetta against the woman who'd raised me. But I had receipts, literal and metaphorical. Every forged document, every stolen transfer, every threatening email. The evidence was overwhelming. But the trial's turning point came from an unexpected source. On day 5, a surprise witness appeared. Dr. Patricia Newcomb, the therapist who'd gaslit network victims for decades. Arrested on related charges, she'd negotiated a deal for testimony that would expose the psychological manipulation techniques used to control victims. "We called it gratitude programming," she explained clinically. "Children who've experienced trauma are desperately seeking stability. We exploited that need, creating emotional dependence, while simultaneously undermining their self-worth. The goal was to make them psychologically incapable of questioning their adoptive families." "How many children did you treat?" Morrison asked. "Approximately 130 over 25 years. All adoptees with inheritances, all subjected to systematic psychological abuse disguised as therapy." "What happened to those who resisted the programming?" Dr. Newcomb's professional detachment finally cracked. They were labeled as having severe adjustment disorders. Increased therapy was recommended, often involving medication that made them more compliant. If that failed, "Continue, doctor." They were referred to the network's resolution specialist. I was told this meant intensive inpatient treatment. I learned later it meant murder. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison gavelled for order, but let the outrage settle naturally. These weren't just financial crimes. They were crimes against humanity perpetrated on society's most vulnerable. Ryan took the stand on day 7, trying desperately to minimize his involvement, but prosecutors had his emails, texts, and recorded conversations planning international fraud. Most damning was a message to Susan. "The Tokyo plan is perfect. Once we have Linda's signatures, we can finally get rid of her like we did Marcus. Make it look like a suicide. She's been so stressed lately, no one would question it." His own words convicted him. The defense's attempt to paint him as a manipulated son fell apart under evidence that he'd actively planned murders, including mine. Susan's testimony came on day 10. She took the stand with residual arrogance, still believing she could manipulate her way to freedom. But Prosecutor Morrison was ready. Mrs. Mitchell, how many children did you adopt over your lifetime? 12. All given loving homes. How many are still alive? Susan hesitated. I've lost touch with several. Wes Morrison produced death certificates. 7 of your adopted children died before age 21. Would you like to explain that statistical anomaly? Troubled children sometimes make poor choices. Like Michael Harrison, who you threatened to murder. That's a mischaracterization. Morrison played recording after recording. Susan threatening children. Susan discussing murder methods with network members. Susan calculating the value of a child's death versus disappearance. The most damning evidence came from her own journal read aloud in court. Entry after entry documenting crimes, analyzing victims, planning thefts. Her meticulous nature had created a confession spanning decades. June 15, 2001. The Chen child proving more resilient than expected. Emotional manipulation proceeding slowly. May need to intensify trauma reminders to maintain compliance. Note, increase references to her burden. On family, decrease praise for achievements. Hearing my psychological torture outlined like a business strategy broke something in me. Michael grabbed my hand as I fought not to cry. We'd all been entries in her ledger investments to be maximized. The defense's closing argument was desperate. Vance tried to humanize Susan, speaking of a difficult childhood, financial pressures, good intentions gone wrong. But how do you humanize someone who commodified children's pain? Morrison's closing was brilliant in its simplicity. She displayed photos of every known victim. The dead, the disappeared, the survivors. Children smiling before their parents died. Teenagers trying to build lives while being stalked and threatened. Adults still healing from decades of abuse. The defense asks for mercy. Where was Susan Mitchell's mercy for 5-year-old Linda Chen crying for parents she'd had murdered? Where was mercy for 17-year-old Michael Harrison forced to choose between death and exile? Where was mercy for any of the 213 children whose lives she destroyed for money? The evidence shows a criminal enterprise that targeted society's most vulnerable, orphaned children with inheritances. They didn't just steal money. They stole identities, families, futures. They murdered parents and children who asked questions. They created a generation of victims too traumatized to seek justice. Today, you can give those victims what Susan Mitchell never did: justice. Find her guilty on all counts. Show that no amount of money is worth a child's life. Show that systematic abuse hiding behind adoption's sacred trust will be punished to the law's fullest extent. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. As the foreman stood, the courtroom held its breath. On count 1, conspiracies is to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On count 3, racketeering, guilty. Guilty on all 47 federal counts. The room erupted in tears and cheers from survivors. Susan stood frozen as the reality hit. She would die in prison. Ryan's verdict came next. Guilty on all counts, including attempted murder for his plan to kill me in Tokyo. He screamed about unfairness, about family loyalty, about being manipulated. But the jury had seen his eager participation in planning murders. He'd chosen greed over humanity. Judge Harrison's sentencing 2 weeks later reflected the crime's severity. Susan received life without parole plus 300 years. Ryan got 80 years with no possibility of early release. The network's other members received sentences ranging from 20 to life, depending on their involvement. But the real victory came in the judge's final words. This court recognizes the extraordinary courage of the survivors who came forward. Your voices ended a generational cycle of abuse. Because of your bravery, no more children will suffer under this network's cruelty. You've transformed unimaginable pain into purpose-saving future generations from similar fates. As we left the courthouse, media surrounded us, but I only had eyes for my chosen family, Michael, Sarah, and 21 other survivors who'd found their voices. We'd entered as victims, but left as victors. Susan had stolen our childhoods, our inheritances, our trust in humanity, but she'd failed to steal our spirits. In the end, that made all the difference. Justice had taken 25 years, but it had finally arrived, and with it came something more valuable than any inheritance: the freedom to build lives no longer defined by trauma, but by triumph. The conference room at Morrison Tech had been transformed into a makeshift command center for the largest asset recovery operation in adoption fraud history. FBI forensic accountants worked alongside private investigators. Interpol liaisons coordinated with international banks. And at the center of it all, Marcus Williams led a team tracking down hundreds of millions in stolen funds. "We've frozen accounts in 14 countries," Marcus reported to our growing survivors group. "The network was sloppy about hiding assets. They never expected to be caught, so they left trails everywhere." I studied the massive spreadsheet projected on the wall. Properties in Miami Swiss bank accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, shell companies in the Caymans. The network had diversified their stolen wealth across every possible avenue. "Total recovered so far?" asked David Thompson, who'd become our liaison with federal asset forfeiture teams. $437 million, Marcus announced, "and we're just getting started." The numbers stunned even those of us who'd known the scope. That money represented hundreds of destroyed childhoods, murdered parents, stolen futures. Now it would be returned to its rightful owners or their estates. "The challenge," explained Agent Martinez, who'd stayed on as FBI coordinator, "is determining fair distribution. Some victims lost everything, others partial amounts. Some have documentation, others only memories. We need a system." Jennifer Walsh, my CEO, who'd become an unofficial advisor to our group, suggested bringing in retired judges to oversee distribution. "We need transparency and fairness. Every survivor deserves restitution, but it has to be beyond legal reproach." Over the following weeks, we developed the Survivors Restitution Fund. The process was complex but necessary. First, direct theft victims would receive their stolen amounts, plus interest calculated from the time of theft. My $2.8 million had grown to over $6 million with proper investment returns I'd been denied. Second, families of murdered victims would receive compensation equal to what their children would have inherited, plus wrongful death settlements. Third, survivors who'd been forced into hiding would receive damages for lost wages, educational opportunities, and psychological trauma. Fourth, any remaining funds would support services for all victims: therapy, education, career rebuilding. "It's not just about money," Sarah emphasized during one planning session. "It's about acknowledging what was taken beyond dollars: our identities, our connections to deceased parents, our ability to trust." The asset forfeiture proceedings revealed the network's staggering reach. Susan alone had acquired 17 properties across the country, all purchased with stolen funds. The Chicago mansion where I'd grown up, a beach house in Florida, mountain cabins in Colorado, each representing a child's stolen future transformed into her luxury. "This one's interesting," Marcus highlighted during an audit session, "a storage facility in Des Moines purchased in 1995 under a shell company." FBI agents investigating the facility found a treasure trove of evidence Susan had hidden. Boxes of documents she'd saved for insurance, including original trust fund paperwork for dozens of victims, correspondence planning murders, and most shocking, videotapes. She recorded sessions with Dr. Newcomb, Agent Martinez explained after reviewing the materials, watching children being psychologically broken, commenting on their progress toward compliance. It's like she was creating a how-to guide for grooming victims. One tape showed my first therapy session at age 7. Watching my younger self try to process grief while Dr. Newcomb subtly undermined my memories of my parents made me physically ill, but it also provided evidence of deliberate psychological torture that would factor into damage calculations. The storage facility also contained trophies from victims. My parents' photo albums, which Susan had told me were lost in a flood. Michael's father's watch, supposedly pawned for his care. Sarah's mother's jewelry claimed sold for medical bills. Precious connections to our biological families hoarded like a serial killer's souvenirs. She wanted us to have nothing of them. Jennifer Huang observed, holding her parents' wedding rings for the first time in 20 years. Not just financially broke, but emotionally severed from our origins. As assets were liquidated and funds accumulated, unexpected allies emerged. Several Fortune 500 companies whose executives had unknowingly donated to the fake placement foundation offered additional compensation. Law firms that had employed network lawyers provided pro bono services. Banks that had processed fraudulent transfers waived fees and assisted in recovery. But the most meaningful restitution came from an unexpected source. During Susan's property auction, her extensive art collection was assessed. Hidden in her private study was a painting I recognized. My mother's work. Margaret Chen was an artist before she became an engineer. Aunt Patricia explained when I called her. She painted as meditation, creating beautiful abstracts inspired by code structures. That piece was in their home when they died. Susan had stolen not just money, but my mother's artistic legacy, displaying it where I'd seen it hundreds of times without knowing its significance. The painting's recovery felt like reclaiming a piece of my mother's soul. The formal restitution hearings began 3 months after the trial. Judge Elizabeth Thornton, brought out of retirement to oversee the process, ran proceedings with compassion and efficiency. This court recognizes that no amount of money can restore stolen childhoods or resurrect murdered parents, she stated in opening remarks. However, financial justice is one component of healing. Will ensure every victim receives what they're owed with interest and damages, reflecting the true cost of these crimes. One by one, survivors presented their cases. Michael detailed 20 years of minimum wage survival, while his millions funded Susan's lifestyle. Sarah showed employment records proving she'd worked 3 jobs to afford community college, while her inheritance paid for Ryan's Ivy League education. My own hearing was straightforward legally but emotionally complex. The stolen $2.8 million was clear. The interest calculation simple, but pricing my parents' murders, my stolen identity, my 23 years of psychological abuse. How do you quantify that loss? The court awards Linda Chen full restitution of stolen funds plus interest totaling $6.7 million. Judge Thornton ruled. Additional damages for wrongful death of Margaret and Thomas Chen, psychological abuse and attempted murder in Tokyo bring the total judgment to $18 million. The number felt simultaneously enormous and insufficient. No amount could buy back childhood memories of my parents or erase decades of manipulation, but it could fund healing and help other survivors. Furthermore, Judge Thornton continued, the court orders transfer of all items belonging to the Chen family found in Susan Mitchell's possession, including, but not limited to, photographs, documents, and Margaret Chen's artistic works. That afternoon, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes of recovered family belongings. Photos of my parents I'd never seen, their wedding, their college graduations, my first birthday. My mother's journals filled with dreams for their daughter. My father's notebook sketching plans for educational software to teach children coding. Among the papers was a letter dated a week before their deaths. Dearest Linda, if something happens to us, know that you were the greatest joy of our lives. Your laugh fills our home with light. Your curiosity amazes us daily. Your kind heart gives us hope for the world's future. We're working to protect you from those who would harm children for profit. But if you're reading this without us, remember, you are loved beyond measure. You are stronger than you know. You will triumph over whatever challenges come. Live brilliantly, our darling girl. The world needs your light. Forever, your loving parents, Mama and Baba. The letter was water-stained. Susan had read it possibly multiple times. She'd known my parents loved me, known their hopes for their daughter, and still murdered them for money. The depth of evil required for such calculations defied comprehension. But their words also provided something I desperately needed. Proof that I was loved, wanted, cherished. Not a burden taken in from pity, but a beloved daughter whose parents died trying to protect her. The restitution process has continued for months. Some cases were simple, clear theft with documentation. Others required extensive investigation. The murdered children's families received not just their stolen inheritances, but portions of the network members' personal assets as wrongful death settlements. For survivors forced into hiding, restitution included identity restoration services. The government provided new legal documents confirming their real names, expunging the false identities they'd lived under. Michael legally reclaimed his name. Sarah could finally use her parents' surname again. It's like being reborn, Sarah explained after receiving her restored birth certificate. 20 years of being nobody, and suddenly I exist again. The final accounting was staggering. Between stolen inheritances, investment returns, and network assets, over $800 million was recovered and distributed. But the true value wasn't monetary. We'd reclaimed our identities, recovered connections to our biological families, validated our experiences as real harm deserving justice. The network had tried to reduce us to financial instruments, but the restitution process affirmed our humanity. As the formal proceedings concluded, Judge Thornton made a final statement. This court has overseen many complex cases, but none affecting me more deeply than this tragedy. To the survivors, your courage in seeking justice has prevented future crimes and saved children not yet born from similar fates. May this restitution provide not just financial recovery, but a foundation for the lives you deserved from the beginning. Standing outside the courthouse with my chosen family of survivors, I held my mother's painting and my father's notebook. The money would help, funding therapy, education, the foundation we'd created. But these tangible connections to my parents were priceless. Susan had stolen millions, but she'd failed to steal what mattered most: our resilience, our bonds with each other, and ultimately our ability to transform trauma into triumph. The restitution was complete, but our real recovery was just beginning. The therapist's office felt different from the sterile rooms Dr. Newcomb had used to break children. Dr. Elena Reyes had decorated with warm colors and living plants, creating a space that invited truth rather than manipulation. I'd been seeing her for 6 months since the trial ended, finally ready to process 23 years of trauma. "How are you sleeping?" she asked during our session on a gray February morning. "Better. Only 2 nightmares this week, both about the birthday party where Susan told everyone I should be grateful for being rescued from the gutter. Progress from nightly terrors. Your nervous system is slowly learning it's safe now. How do you feel about Robert's visit request?" I shifted uncomfortably. Robert, the man I'd called Dad despite his complicit silence, had written asking to meet. His letters from the hospice facility were full of regret and medical updates I hadn't asked for. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed shortly after Susan's conviction. 3 to 6 months to live. "I don't know if I can forgive him," I admitted. "He watched her torture me psychologically for decades and did nothing. But he's also the only parent figure who showed me any genuine affection, even if it was compromised." Forgiveness isn't required for healing, Dr. Reyes reminded me, but unfinished business can complicate grief. What do you need from him? Answers. Real answers about why he stayed silent, and maybe just to say goodbye to the parts of him that were kind. 2 days later, I drove to the hospice facility in Wilmette. Robert looked like a shadow of his former self-cancer, having stripped away everything but sharp bones and regret. His eyes lit up when I entered, then immediately filled with tears. Linda, you came. I sat carefully in the visitor's chair, maintaining distance. You said you had things to tell me. So much. But first, I'm sorry. Those words are pathetically inadequate for 23 years of failure, but they're all I have. I'm sorry I chose my comfort over your safety. Sorry I let fear make me a coward. Sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. Why, the question I'd wanted to ask for years came out barely above a whisper. Why didn't you protect me? Robert's hands shook as he reached for water. Because I was weak. Susan saved me from myself when I was drowning in gambling debt, and I let that debt become chains. Every time I thought about intervening, she'd remind me how she could destroy my life, take away my son, ruin my career. I traded your childhood for my stability. You traded my safety for your convenience. Yes, he agreed without deflection. And I'll die knowing that's unforgivable. But Linda, there's something else. Something I should have told you years ago. He pulled out a small key from his bedside drawer. Safety deposit box at Chase Bank on Michigan Avenue. I opened it the day you arrived at our home. Every raise I got, every bonus, every tax refund, I put money there for you. It's not much compared to what Susan stole, maybe $300,000, but I needed you to have something that came from love, not theft. I stared at the key. You saved money for me while letting her steal millions. I know how it sounds, putting band-aids on arterial wounds, but it was all I could do while staying too scared to do what mattered. There are also letters in there. One for every birthday, writing what I should have said aloud. How proud I was of your achievements. How your kindness, despite our cruelty, amazed me. How sorry I was for failing you. Loaned letters, I repeated flatly. You wrote letters while she called me a charity case at family dinners. Yes, because I'm a coward who could only be brave on paper alone where she couldn't see. His voice cracked. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that somewhere in this broken, failed man was love for the daughter who deserved so much better. We sat in silence while monitors beeped and winter rain pelted windows. This dying man had been the closest thing to real parental love I'd known, yet that love had been caged by cowardice. Could I forgive him? Did I need to? I'm building a life now, I finally said. Real relationships with people who see me as more than an obligation or opportunity. The survivors from the network have become my chosen family. I'm learning what love looks like without conditions or manipulation. That's beautiful, Robert whispered. You've become extraordinary despite us. Not despite you, because of what I survived. Every cruelty made me more determined to be different. Every manipulation taught me to recognize authenticity. You and Susan showed me exactly who I refused to become. Robert nodded, tears flowing freely. Then maybe our failures served some purpose. Creating someone strong enough to break the cycle, save others, build something better from the ashes we made of your childhood. I stayed another hour sharing updates about the foundation, the restitution process, the healing journey. Robert listened with attention he'd never shown during my childhood, asking questions that suggested genuine interest rather than obligation. As I prepared to leave, he made one final request. Will you let me know how your life goes, not asking for visits or forgiveness, just updates, so I can picture you happy before I go? I'll think about it, I said honestly. That's more than I deserve. Linda, be free, be magnificent, be everything Susan and I were too broken to let you become. I left without looking back, but pulled over 2 blocks away as sobs overtook me, grieving not the father Robert had been, but the one he could have been with courage, mourning the protector who'd existed only in secret letters while I needed him in real life. That evening, my chosen family gathered for our weekly dinner. A tradition started after the trial to maintain connections beyond shared trauma. Michael cooked while Sarah mixed cocktails. Jennifer Huang brought dessert from the French bakery that had become our celebration spot. David Thompson arrived with his new partner, someone he'd finally trusted enough to share his history. "How was it?" Sarah asked, knowing about the visit. "Complicated. He saved money for me while letting her steal millions, wrote letters about loving me while staying silent during abuse. He was a coward who loved me and a father who failed me. I don't know how to reconcile those truths." "Maybe you don't have to," Michael suggested. "Maybe complex people require complex grieving. You can mourn the father you needed while acknowledging the flawed human who existed." "The opposite of Susan," Jennifer added. "She was consistently evil. Robert was inconsistently human. That's harder to process, but ultimately less damaging." We talked late into the night about complicated grief, imperfect love, the challenge of healing when wounds came from both cruelty and neglect. These conversations had become our real therapy, survivors understanding each other in ways trained professionals couldn't fully grasp. 3 weeks later, Robert passed away quietly in his sleep. I attended the small funeral, standing apart from distant relatives who whispered about the scandal. At the graveside, I left a single white rose. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. He'd been weak where I needed strength, silent where I needed advocacy, complicit where I needed protection. But he'd also been human in a house ruled by a monster. The safety deposit box contained exactly what he'd promised: 300,000 in cashier's checks and 60 letters, one for every birthday and holiday. I read them slowly over several weeks, finding a different man in words than in life. A man who noticed my achievements, celebrated my strengths, and hated himself for lacking courage to voice support aloud. The money went to the foundation funding therapy scholarships for survivors who couldn't afford treatment. It felt right. Transformation of his cowardly savings into brave support for healing. The letters I kept evidence that even in the darkest situations, love could exist, however imperfectly expressed. Dr. Reyes helped me process the complex grief over following months. "Robert showed you that people can love you while failing you. That's actually valuable preparation for real relationships, which are full of imperfect humans doing their best, and sometimes falling short. So I should be grateful for his failures." Not grateful, but aware that love and failure can coexist, that people can care deeply while acting weakly. Susan's evil was pure, making her easier to reject entirely. Robert's flawed humanity makes him harder to categorize, but ultimately more instructive for navigating real relationships. Slowly, through therapy and survivor support and building new connections, I began distinguishing between love and manipulation, between human imperfection and calculated cruelty. The Foundation's work helped. Every child protected, every survivor supported was proof that trauma could transform into purpose. 1 year after the trial, our survivor group held a celebration of life ceremony, not for the parents we'd lost or the childhood stolen, but for the lives we were building. 25 candles for 25 survivors who'd found their voices. We shared stories of progress: Michael's promotion to senior forensic accountant, Sarah's acceptance to law school, Jennifer's expansion of her venture firm to focus on ethical investments. To the children who survived, David toasted. To the parents who died protecting us. To the futures they'd be proud to see us building. To chosen families, Sarah added, who show us love doesn't require blood or obligation. To healing, I concluded, messy and non-linear and ongoing, but possible. We released biodegradable lanterns into the night sky, each carrying a message to lost parents. Mine read, "I found them, Mama and Baba, the other children you worried about. We're protecting each other now, building the world you dreamed of. Your daughter is free." Watching those lights rise and disperse, I felt something shift. Not closure, some wounds never fully close. Not forgiveness, some acts remain unforgivable. But acceptance that healing didn't require either. It required only moving forward, building something beautiful from broken pieces, choosing love despite knowing its risks. Susan remained in prison, her appeals exhausted. Ryan had been transferred to maximum security after attempting to organize fraud schemes inside. The network was destroyed, its members scattered to various federal facilities. Justice had been served. But healing, that was ongoing daily work. Some days I woke still feeling like that desperate 5-year-old seeking approval. Other days, I stood before Congress advocating for adoptee rights with strength my parents would have admired. Progress wasn't linear, but it was real. The foundation grew, supporting hundreds of survivors. My executive role at Morrison Tech expanded, using financial expertise to protect rather than exploit. Relationships deepened as I learned to trust, fail, repair, and trust again. 2 years after the trial, I stood in my apartment surrounded by friends who'd become family. My mother's paintings decorated walls. My father's notebooks inspired new child protection technologies. The Chen legacy lived not in stolen money recovered, but in lives transformed. "Thank you," I said suddenly, words directed at the universe, at my murdered parents, at the strength I'd found in darkness. For surviving, for fighting, for becoming someone who could end their cruelty and begin this healing. Michael raised his glass to Linda Chen, who showed us victory was possible. To all of us, I corrected, who proved love wins even when it takes 25 years. The healing would continue tomorrow and the day after for the rest of our lives. But tonight, surrounded by chosen family building, the future our parents died trying to protect, we were enough. We were home. The Chen Foundation's headquarters occupied the top floor of a renovated building in Chicago's West Loop, its floor-to-ceiling windows flooding the space with natural light. 2 years had passed since the trial, and what started as a desperate alliance of survivors had evolved into a nationally recognized organization protecting adoptees' financial rights. I stood before a wall of success stories, photographs and letters from children whose inheritances we'd safeguarded, families reunited after decades of separation, survivors who'd reclaimed their identities. Each represented a life saved from the fate we'd narrowly escaped. Linda, my assistant, knocked gently. "The NBC crew is here for the documentary interview." The documentary, Stolen Futures, the Adoption Fraud Network, would premiere next month, exposing the full scope of the crimes while highlighting our foundation's work. I'd hesitated, initially wary of reliving trauma for public consumption, but Michael convinced me our story could prevent future victims. The interview setup transformed our conference room into a mini studio. As makeup artists worked, I thought about how differently I'd have handled this attention 3 years ago, desperate for approval, minimizing my worth. Now I sat as executive director of a foundation managing $60 million in assets, preparing to share truth without shame. "Ms. Chen, we're ready when you are," the producer said. The interviewer, veteran journalist Patricia Wells, had covered the trial extensively. Her questions were thorough but respectful, allowing me to share our story while maintaining dignity for all survivors. "Tell us about the moment you decided to fight back," she prompted. "There wasn't one moment," I explained. "It was 1,000 small revelations. Every child who'd been labeled troubled when they questioned missing money. Every suicide that wasn't really suicide. Every life destroyed for profit. I realized staying silent made me complicit in future crimes." The network stole over $400 million across 4 decades. How do you process that scale? By focusing on faces, not numbers. Marcus Williams, who spent 20 years hiding under a false name. Sarah Peterson, who worked 3 jobs to afford community college while her millions funded luxury vacations. Behind every dollar was a child who deserved better. Your adoptive mother, Susan Mitchell, maintains her innocence from federal prison. She recently gave an interview claiming you orchestrated this for revenge. How do you respond? I'd learned not to flinch at Susan's name. Susan Mitchell was convicted on 47 federal counts, including murder, fraud, and racketeering. The evidence included her own journals documenting crimes. If seeking justice for murdered parents and stolen childhoods is revenge, then yes, I'm guilty of that. Speaking of parents, you've built something remarkable from their legacy. Tell us about the Chen Foundation's work. This was easier territory. We operate on 3 levels. First, we audit adoption financial arrangements to ensure transparency. Second, we provide legal support for adoptees discovering fraud. Third, we offer therapeutic services specifically for financial abuse survivors. Last year alone, we prevented 14 attempted inheritance thefts and recovered $32 million in stolen assets. And you're expanding internationally. The network operated globally, so our response must be global. We're partnering with our organizations in 12 countries to create universal standards for protecting adoptee inheritances. The interview continued for 2 hours, covering the trial, the restitution, the ongoing healing process. Patricia asked about my personal life, which I answered carefully but honestly. You're engaged to David Martinez, whom you met through this work. How did tragedy lead to love? I smiled, thinking of David. Not David Thompson from our survivor group, but the federal prosecutor who'd handled our case's international aspects. David joked that it was the least romantic meet-cute ever, bonding over extradition treaties and asset forfeiture laws, but he saw me at my worst and stayed. He understood that healing isn't linear, that some days I'm still that traumatized 5-year-old. His patience and consistency showed me what unconditional love actually looks like. Your wedding is next month. Will any of your adoptive family attend? My chosen family will be there. The survivors who've become siblings in ways blood never made Ryan. As for Susan and Ryan, they'll be in federal prison where they belong. Family isn't about DNA or legal documents. It's about who shows up, who stays, who helps you heal. After the interview wrapped, I returned to my office to find an unexpected visitor. Jennifer Huang sat in my guest chair holding a worn envelope. What's this?" I asked, accepting the package. "Open it," she encouraged. Inside were adoption papers, but not old ones documenting theft. These were new, dated last week from the state of California. "You adopted?" I gasped. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. 2 siblings, 8 and 6. Their parents died in a car accident, no extended family. They have modest life insurance policies that unscrupulous people were already circling. I remembered being 8, losing everything, trusting the wrong people. I couldn't let it happen again. "Jennifer, this is incredible, but are you ready? Trauma-affected children need so much support." "That's why I'm here. The Chen Foundation doesn't just protect money. You've created a blueprint for raising orphans with dignity. I want to do this right. Show these kids they're wanted, not meal tickets." We spent the afternoon discussing therapeutic approaches, financial safeguards, and the delicate balance between acknowledging loss and building new bonds. Jennifer had resources Susan never possessed. Wealth earned honestly genuine desire to nurture and hard-won wisdom about recovery from childhood trauma. "I've been thinking," Jennifer said as she prepared to leave. "We're all building families in different ways. You and David will have children someday. Michael's fostering teenagers. Sarah's mentoring law students who grew up in foster care. We're creating the families we needed." She was right. Our survivor group had evolved from shared trauma to genuine kinship. Weekly dinners had become holiday celebrations, emergency contacts, godparent agreements. We'd built the stable, supportive family structure our adoptive families had mimicked but never truly provided. 2 weeks later, I attended Jennifer's home to meet her new children. Lily and James sat close together on the couch, the hypervigilance of recent trauma evident in their careful movements. But Jennifer had already begun creating safety. Their rooms, decorated with their input photo albums of their birth parents, displayed prominently a therapist specializing in childhood grief, already engaged. "This is my friend Linda," Jennifer introduced. "She understands about missing mommies and daddies." Lily, the 8-year-old, studied me with eyes too knowing for her age. "Did someone take care of you when your parents went to heaven?" "Someone was supposed to," I answered honestly, "but they weren't very good at it. That's why I help make sure kids like you get people who are good at it, like Jennifer." "She said we can keep our real last name," James piped up, "and visit mommy and daddy's special place whenever we want." "That's important," I affirmed. "You'll always be their children first. Jennifer just gets to love you too." Over the following months, I watched Jennifer navigate adoptive parenthood with grace Susan never attempted. She honored the children's grief while building new traditions. She protected their modest inheritance while teaching them financial literacy. Most importantly, she loved them without conditions or expectations of gratitude. At a foundation board meeting, Marcus proposed expanding our mission. We focused on protecting assets, but what about creating them? What if we established education trusts for adoptees whose biological parents left little or nothing? The idea sparked immediate interest. Sarah suggested partnerships with law firms for pro bono services. David Thompson offered real estate investments to fund sustainable growth. Within hours, we'd outlined the Chen Foundation Education Initiative, full scholarships for adoptees pursuing higher education. "We're not just stopping theft anymore," I realized aloud. "We're creating opportunities our biological parents would have provided." The foundation's work attracted attention from unexpected sources: tech billionaires who'd aged out of foster care, celebrities who'd survived predatory guardianships, anonymous donors who'd discovered their own adoption irregularities. Money flowed in faster than we could deploy it responsibly. "Good problem to have," Michael laughed during a strategy session. "Remember when we thought recovering a few million would be victory?" But the real victory came in smaller moments. A teenager discovering her inheritance intact thanks to our audit program. An adult adoptee successfully suing for stolen assets using our legal template. A survivor finally feeling safe enough to use their real name after decades of hiding. One evening, as David and I addressed wedding invitations, I found myself writing names of people who'd become family through trauma and triumph. Michael Harrison, groomsman. Sarah Peterson, maid of honor. Jennifer Huang, reading a poem. David Thompson, officiating. He'd gotten ordained online specifically for this. "No blood relatives," David observed, not critically but curiously. "All heart relatives," I corrected. "Bonds forged in fire burn brightest." He pulled me close, this man who'd prosecuted my family's destroyers and stayed to help build something better. "Speaking of family," the adoption agency called. "We're approved for the sibling group from Guatemala." We decided to adopt before biological children wanting to provide homes for children like we'd been. 3 siblings orphaned by mudslides, their small inheritance already attracting predatory interest. The Chen Foundation would protect their assets while we protected their hearts. 3 kids at once, I mused. Susan would say we're crazy. "Susan's in prison for life. Her opinion stopped mattering the day you walked out of that Thanksgiving dinner." He was right. Susan existed now only as a cautionary tale, a reminder of how power over vulnerable children corrupts. She'd write occasionally. Letters full of manipulation and false remorse that went straight to my lawyer. Ryan had stopped writing after his final appeal failed. They'd become footnotes in a story that had grown beyond them. Our wedding day dawned bright and clear Lake Michigan, sparkling outside the venue. No traditional family sides, instead survivors and supporters intermixed, creating a tapestry of chosen bonds. Patricia walked me down the aisle, my aunt having become the maternal figure Susan never was. Michael's best man speech brought tears. Linda taught us that family isn't about blood or obligation, but about who fights beside you. Today, she gains a partner who's proven worthy of that fight. To David and Linda, may your love story rewrite the narrative that tried to define us. Sarah followed with her maid of honor toast. 20 years ago, we were children convinced we deserved only conditional love. Today, we celebrate unconditional commitment between two people who understand that love is not a transaction, but a gift freely given. To the bride and groom, may your family grow in joy, not obligation. As David and I exchanged vows, I thought of Margaret and Thomas Chen. They died trying to protect their daughter from those who would exploit her. They couldn't have imagined that daughter would not only survive, but transform that evil into a force for protecting all vulnerable children. I promise, I told David to love you without conditions, trust you without reservation, and build a family defined by choice, not chance. You've shown me that love doesn't require perfection, only presence. I choose you today and always. The reception filled with laughter tears and the chaotic joy of assembled families. Jennifer's adopted children flower-girled and ring-beared with enthusiasm. Michael introduced his new partner. Sarah announced her graduation from law school with honors. David Thompson revealed his engagement. Lives once defined by loss now overflowed with love. As the evening wound down, I stood on the terrace overlooking the lake. The Chen Foundation's work would continue tomorrow. More children to protect more survivors, to support more predators to stop. But tonight was for celebrating the family we'd built from ashes. David joined me, wrapping his arms around my waist. No regrets. None. This is exactly where I should be with exactly who I should be with. Even though it started with such pain, especially because of that, we're proof that trauma doesn't have to define your ending, that chosen families can heal wounds, blood families created, that love wins even when it takes a long time to arrive. Fireworks burst over the lake as our guests joined us outside. 25 survivors who'd become siblings, prosecutors who'd become protectors, a broken system transformed into a safety net, and at the center, two people who'd found love while seeking justice. Susan had stolen money but created something priceless, a family bonded by survival, strengthened by choice, and committed to ensuring no child would suffer as we had. Her legacy of theft had become our legacy of protection. The Chen family name would continue not through blood, but through the foundation saving children worldwide. My parents' dream of making the world safer had manifested in ways they'd never imagined, but would have championed. As David and I left for our honeymoon rice thrown by our chosen family, I felt complete in ways that scared desperate 5-year-old could never have imagined. Not despite the trauma, but because surviving it had taught me the value of real love, the power of chosen bonds, and the joy of building something beautiful from broken pieces. The network had tried to steal our futures. Instead, they'd created an army of protectors ensuring no child's future would be stolen again. And in that transformation, we'd found more than justice or restitution. We'd found family. 5 years had passed since that Thanksgiving night when I walked out of Susan's house with nothing but determination. Now I stood in the chambers of the United States Congress preparing to testify before the House Judiciary Committee about the Protective Adoption Financial Security Act, legislation inspired by our case that would revolutionize how America protected its most vulnerable children. The gallery behind me filled with familiar faces. Michael sat with his husband and their two foster sons. Sarah, now a practicing attorney specializing in adoption law, reviewed her notes one final time. Jennifer watched from the back row with Lily and James, now thriving teenagers who'd become passionate advocates for adoptee rights. David held our 3-year-old daughter Maya while keeping an eye on the twins we'd adopted from Guatemala. Committee Chairwoman Elizabeth Warren called the hearing to order. Ms. Chen, thank you for being here today. Your story has captivated the nation and exposed systematic failures in our adoption oversight. Please share your thoughts on the proposed legislation. I leaned toward the microphone, no longer the traumatized woman seeking approval, but an advocate with the power to create change. Chairwoman Warren, distinguished members of the committee, 5 years ago, I discovered that my adoptive mother had murdered my biological parents and stolen my inheritance. This wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a criminal network that had operated for over 40 years, destroying hundreds of lives. The room fell silent as I outlined our journey. The investigation, the trial, the restitution, and most importantly, the survivors who'd rebuilt their lives while ensuring others wouldn't suffer similar fates. Behind me, Maya whispered loudly to David, "Is Mama on TV?" The moment of levity helped ground me in the present while addressing the past. Lourdes, the Protective Adoption Financial Security Act, would require 3 critical reforms, I continued. First, mandatory financial audits for all adoptions involving inheritances over $50,000. Second, independent advocacy for adopted children to ensure their assets remain protected. Third, severe criminal penalties for financial exploitation of adopted minors. Questions came from both sides of the aisle. Representative Johnson from Texas asked about implementation costs. Senator Park from California inquired about privacy concerns. I answered each with statistics gathered through 5 years of foundation work. Real stories of children saved and predators stopped. Some argue this legislation could discourage adoption, Representative Mills suggested. How do you respond? Respectfully, sir, it will discourage the wrong people from adopting. Families motivated by love won't fear financial transparency. Only those viewing children as income sources will be deterred. That's precisely the point. The hearing stretched for 3 hours. Other witnesses testified, prosecutors who'd handled similar cases, social workers advocating for reform, adult adoptees sharing their own stories of financial exploitation. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. The committee recognizes Robert Mitchell appearing via video link from Federal Correctional Institution Otisville. Ryan appeared on the screen, 5 years of prison having aged him dramatically. Gone was the entitled brother who'd planned my murder. In his place sat a man who'd finally faced consequences. Members of Congress. Ryan began, his voice rough. I participated in crimes against my sister and dozens of other adopted children. I was raised to view them as opportunities rather than family. This legislation would have prevented my mother from murdering Linda's parents and stealing her inheritance. It would have saved me from becoming a criminal. Please don't let other children suffer because adults prioritize profit over protection. His testimony was part of a plea deal for reduced sentence, cooperation in exchange for years off his term. But something in his eyes suggested genuine remorse. Prison had taught him what privilege couldn't, that actions have consequences, that stolen wealth provides no lasting satisfaction. After the hearing concluded, reporters surrounded our group, but I gravitated toward a quiet corner where Aunt Patricia waited with someone I hadn't expected, an elderly woman with my mother's eyes. "Linda," Patricia said softly. "This is your grandmother, your mother's mother. She's been living in Beijing searching for you since the network stole you." The woman, my grandmother, impossibly, reached out with trembling hands. She spoke Mandarin, which I didn't understand. But Patricia translated, "She says you have your mother's strength and your father's determination. She's proud of what you've built from their ashes." We embraced while cameras clicked around us, 3 generations of Chen women reunited. By justice, delayed but not denied. My children ran over curious about this new relative, and suddenly, 4 generations stood together, past, present, and future intertwined. 2 weeks later, the Protective Adoption Financial Security Act passed both houses with overwhelming bipartisan support. President Harrison signed it into law at a ceremony attended by hundreds of adoptees and advocates. The Chen Foundation received a presidential commendation for our work protecting vulnerable children. This law ensures no child will lose both their parents and their inheritance to greed, the president stated. Linda Chen and her fellow survivors transformed personal tragedy into national reform. They exemplify American resilience, building better futures from broken pasts. As I held the ceremonial pen used to sign the legislation, I thought about circles closing and new ones beginning. Susan had tried to steal everything, but her greed had catalyzed changes protecting millions of children. Her legacy of theft had become our legacy of protection signed into federal law. The Foundation's work expanded internationally. We partnered with organizations across 40 countries, creating global standards for adoption financial oversight. Our education initiative had provided full scholarships to over 300 adoptees. Our legal clinic had recovered nearly $1 billion in stolen assets. But the numbers, while impressive, weren't what mattered most. What mattered were the lives saved, families preserved, futures protected. Every audit that caught fraud early. Every child who kept their inheritance intact. Every predator who chose different targets, knowing we were watching. One evening, as our family gathered for dinner, a chaotic affair with 3 young children and rotating cast of chosen aunts and uncles, David raised a question that had been nagging at me. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Susan hadn't been so cruel at that Thanksgiving? If she'd just been quietly stealing instead of rubbing it in?" I considered while cutting Maya's food into smaller pieces. I might have discovered the theft eventually, but without that crystallizing moment of cruelty, I might have tried to handle it privately, keeping the family secret. Her arrogance saved hundreds of children. "Oh, Mama's talking about bad grandma again," one of the twins observed matter-of-factly. "Not grandma," I corrected gently. "Just someone who pretended to be. Real grandmas love without conditions." "Like Nai Nai?" Maya asked, using the Mandarin term for grandmother she'd learned. "Exactly like Nai Nai." My biological grandmother had moved from Beijing to Chicago, wanting to be near her recovered family. She spent afternoons teaching our children Mandarin, sharing stories of my mother, filling gaps Susan had tried to make permanent. The children adored her, this unexpected bridge to heritage nearly lost. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of our dinner guests. Michael and his family brought dessert. Sarah arrived with her new girlfriend and pro bono case files to review. Jennifer's teenagers immediately took charge of our kids, their own experiences, making them naturally nurturing with younger children. "Any word from the prison?" Jennifer asked quietly while kids played in the next room. I nodded. "Susan had a stroke last week. She's partially paralyzed, requires constant care. The prison wants to know about compassionate release." "You're not considering it?" Sarah's voice carried sharp concern. "No, she showed no compassion to the children she murdered or traumatized. She can receive appropriate medical care in custody. My compassion goes to her victims, not their victimizer." "Well, good," Michael said firmly. "Some acts forfeit the right to mercy." The conversation shifted to happier topics. Sarah's latest victory recovering stolen assets, Jennifer's daughter Lily getting accepted to Yale, Michael's foster sons thriving in their stable home. We'd all built families defined by choice and commitment rather than mere biology or legal documents. As the evening wound down and guests prepared to leave, Sarah pulled me aside. "I have news. Remember Thomas Bradley, the infant whose parents died in that suspicious fire last month?" My stomach tightened. Despite our law's passage, predators still attempted to exploit tragedies. The case in Denver. Local authorities arrested his adoptive parents yesterday. They'd already attempted to access his trust fund using forged documents. The Chen Foundation's alert system caught it within days instead of decades. Good. I exhaled relief. That's why we do this work. After everyone left and children were asleep, David and I sat on our deck overlooking the backyard where a playset stood next to my mother's painting studio, a space I'd created to honor her artistic legacy while building my own. "Oh, 5 years," David mused. "From that Thanksgiving to testifying before Congress. You've rewritten your entire story." "We've rewritten it," I corrected. "None of this happens alone. Every survivor who spoke up, every prosecutor who fought, every donor who believed in our mission, we all rewrote the narrative together." "What's next?" I considered the question. The foundation ran smoothly with competent staff. The law provided protection previously absent. Our family was thriving. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from trauma or toward justice, but simply existing in peace. "Maybe that's enough," I said. "Maybe the next chapter is just living, raising our children with the love my parents would have provided, supporting other survivors without that being my entire identity, being Linda Chen, wife, mother, advocate, artist, survivor, and whatever else I choose to become." David smiled, pulling me closer. "That sounds like the best happy ending. Not dramatic, just happy." Inside, I heard Maya call out from a dream. I went to check, finding her sitting up in bed, clutching the stuffed panda my grandmother had given her. "But bad dream?" I asked, smoothing her hair. "Dreamed you went away?" she mumbled sleepily. "Never," I promised, holding her close. "Mama's staying right here, forever and always." As she drifted back to sleep, I reflected on the journey from a traumatized 5-year-old desperate for belonging to a woman surrounded by chosen family and purpose. The money Susan stole had been recovered and multiplied through foundation work, but the real wealth was this: a daughter who'd never question her worth, sons who'd grow up seeing strength and compassion, a husband who showed love through consistency, and a family built on truth rather than manipulation. Susan remained in prison, partially paralyzed and forgotten, except as a cautionary tale. Her network had crumbled, its members scattered across federal facilities or graves. Ryan served his time, his recent testimony suggesting possible redemption, though never reconciliation. The biological parents I'd never known lived on through protected children and artistic legacy. But most importantly, that scared little girl who'd believed she was only there because someone felt sorry for her, she'd discovered the truth. She was there because she was loved, wanted, and destined to transform tragedy into triumph. The Protective Adoption Financial Security Act would be my public legacy, saving countless children from the fate I'd narrowly escaped. But my private legacy lived in the family, sleeping peacefully in our home, the survivors who would become siblings. The future stretching bright with possibility, rather than dark with dread. Susan had given me one gift through her cruelty, the knowledge that I was never there because anyone felt sorry for me. I was there because Margaret and Thomas Chen created me in love, because their sacrifice demanded justice, because surviving made me strong enough to ensure others wouldn't just survive but thrive. As I returned to bed beside David, our house full of love Susan could never understand, I whispered a final thank you to the universe for the pain that forged strength, for the loss that taught the value of love, for the journey that led from isolation to abundance. The girl who'd walked out of that Thanksgiving dinner had been broken but not beaten. The woman who'd testified before Congress was whole, not despite her scars, but because she'd transformed them into stars, lighting the way for others. And that was the ultimate victory. Not just surviving Susan's cruelty or recovering stolen millions, but building a life so full of genuine love that her conditional approval became irrelevant. She tried to convince me I was nothing without her. Instead, I discovered I was everything without her, and that everything included a family, a purpose, a legacy, and most importantly, the knowledge that I was always enough. The story that began with "You're only here because I felt sorry for you" ended with a truth Susan never grasped. Love isn't obligation or transaction. It's a choice made daily to show up, support, and celebrate each other's growth. And surrounded by those who chose to love me while I chose to love them, I was exactly where I belonged, not from pity or obligation, but from the conscious decision to build something beautiful from broken pieces. Home, family, purpose, love. The happy ending Susan tried to steal but only delayed. The life my parents died believing their daughter would someday claim. Mine. Finally, fully forever mine. Thank you for joining Linda's journey from betrayal to triumph. If this story touched you, please consider supporting organizations that protect vulnerable children and their inheritances. Together, we can ensure no child loses both their parents and their birthright to those who would exploit their grief. What would you do if you discovered your whole life was built on lies? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and redemption. Remember, family isn't always blood. Sometimes the strongest bonds are forged through choice, strengthened by adversity, and defined by unconditional love. Thank you for watching, and may you always know your worth regardless of who tries to diminish it. If you enjoyed Linda's story, please share it with others who might need to hear that trauma doesn't define your ending. It can become the foundation for your greatest triumph.